Waiting for the clock to turn, but close. Okay, I'm ready now. Welcome everyone to the April 6th Lawrence City Commission meeting. Before we get going, we'll have a few words from Porter O'Neill, our Communications and Creative Resources Director.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, everyone. I just want to share a few housekeeping items for this virtual meeting. This meeting is being broadcast and recorded on the City of Lawrence YouTube channel and on Channel 25. The public chat function is disabled. All chats will go directly to me. When you are not participating in the meeting, please mute your microphone. When you are participating in the meeting, please keep your video on. When you are not participating in the meeting, please turn your video off. You will still be able to hear the meeting. You can turn your video back on when you are participating. Turning your video off when you are not participating allows the active meeting participants to be seen on the screen. If you have any trouble, please send me a chat. The city reserves the right to mute microphones and/or turn off people's video to minimize distractions. Please remember to state your name every time you speak for the benefit of those listening remotely. And now I'll return the meeting to Mayor Finkeldye.
Mayor Finkeldye, thank you, Porter. I'll do roll call. Vice Mayor Shipley.
Here.
Commissioner Nanda.
Here.
Commissioner Lawson.
Here.
Commissioner Boley.
Here.
Mayor Finkeldye here. And again, we'll have a few comments from Sherry Riedemann, our city clerk, on the procedure for the meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to provide a few procedural reminders. Commissioners, please remember to state your name and title each time you speak. Mayor, after a motion is made and seconded, please call on commissioners individually to provide their vote, then announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. City staff, please remember to state your name and title each time you speak. When the mayor calls for public comment on an item, individuals participating via Zoom should use the raise hand function to indicate they wish to speak. The raise hand function may appear in different places on your Zoom menu depending on the device you are using and which version of Zoom you have. Individuals will be called upon by name in the order they appear on the meeting host screen. When you are called on, please unmute and state your name. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. When the mayor calls for in-person public comment, individuals should raise their hand to indicate they wish to speak. Staff present will direct you to the podium to speak following social distancing and safety protocols. Please state your name before speaking, and comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Mayor Finkeldye, thank you, Sherry. The first item on the agenda is to approve the agenda. The City Commission reserves the right to amend, supplement, or reorder the agenda during the meeting. Would any commissioner like to change the agenda, or I'd look for a motion?
Commissioner Nanda, I move to approve the agenda.
Commissioner Larson, second.
Mayor Finkeldye, we have a motion by Commissioner Ananda, a second by Commissioner Lawson. Commissioner Ananda?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Shipley?
Aye.
Commissioner Boley?
Aye.
Mayor Finkeldye, aye. Passes 5-0. We'll now move on to proclamations. We have 3 proclamations tonight. And the first one is to proclaim the month of April 2021 as Child Abuse Prevention Month. And I believe Eric Vaughn from CASA is here to speak before I read the proclamation.
Yes, thank you. It's Eric Vaughn. I'm Executive Director at Douglas County CASA, and I also represent the Douglas County Child Abuse Prevention Task Force. So on behalf of the task force and all the organizations and individuals it represents, I want to say thank you to the City Commission for taking action to proclaim April Child Abuse Prevention Month, and also for supporting children and families in our community through grants to nonprofit organizations that provide education, awareness services, and intervene to support children and families when they experience abuse and neglect. Every child is born with countless possibilities, and as individuals in a community, we must ensure all our children and young people have the support they need to realize their potential. Regardless of who they are or the characteristics of their birth, each child deserves to be cared for, cherished, and kept safe from harm. Tragically, 1 in 7 children experience abuse and neglect each year, thus tarnishing and eroding this hope and potential for hundreds of children in our community each year. This month, we celebrate the love and courage it takes to raise a child, and we reaffirm the fundamental right of all children to live free from violence and abuse, and we rededicate ourselves to ending the harm to many children and that many children and youth face. A strong, stable family is the best foundation for a promising childhood, and when parents and caregivers have support from loved ones, friends, and their community, they're more likely to provide safe and healthy environments for children. It is important for all people to recognize the signs of child neglect, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, including sudden changes in behavior or school performance and untreated physical or medical issues. Reporting any concerns could protect a child and connect a family with the help they need. We at CASA strongly believe in the protective factor of a safe and caring adult in the life of a child. You do not have to be at CASA to do this, although we are recruiting new volunteers, so give us a call if you or someone has a passion for helping children. But no matter your role, whether it's a teacher, law enforcement officer, friend, family member, or neighbor, I encourage you to be a good example and offer good words of encouragement and care for each other. Take action to help if you have the opportunity and means, and especially do this for children in your life and the adults who are caring for those children. This is especially important as we continue to work to overcome the COVID pandemic. You never know the impact that love and care will have in the life of a child or a parent who is struggling. So thank you again. Thank you for supporting, for allowing me to share some remarks this evening. And to learn more about how to prevent or report child abuse, visit childwelfare.gov or contact any of the wonderful nonprofit agencies in our community who support children, families, and victims of crimes.
Mayor Finkel, I thank you, Eric, for those words, and thank you for all you do at CASA. And I'll now read the proclamation. Whereas children are key to the city's future success, prosperity, and quality of life, and while children are our most valuable resource, they are also our most vulnerable. And whereas child abuse and neglect can have long-term psychological, emotional, and physical effects in addition to long-term personal, economic, and social costs, and whereas child abuse and neglect can be prevented by increasing protective factors, conditions in families and communities that, when present, reduce or eliminate risk and promote the well-being of children and families. And whereas we acknowledge that we must work together as a community to increase awareness of child abuse and neglect and to promote the protective factors that prevent child abuse and neglect. Parental resilience, the ability of parents to deal effectively with stress, adversity, or trauma. Number 2, social connections, such as relationships with family, friends, neighbors, and other community members. 3, concrete support, which gives family the support and resources they need during times of struggle and stress. 4, knowledge of parenting and child development, because children thrive when parents understand how to appropriately care for children. And 5, social and emotional competence of children, which helps children properly label and understand different emotions in themselves and others. Now, therefore, I, Brad Finkeldye, Mayor of the City of Lawrence, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2021 as Child Abuse Prevention Month. Again, thank you, Eric, and thank you for all of doing this difficult work and necessary work. The second proclamation is to proclaim the month of April 2021 to be Fair Housing Month. And I believe Amber Sellers from our Human Relations Commission is here to say a few words before I read the proclamation.
Yes. Good evening, Mayor Finkeldye, City Commissioners, and Lawrence residents who are on this evening. April marks the 53rd anniversary of the Federal Fair Housing Act, signed into law on April 11, 1968, just 7 days after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Federal Fair Housing Act expanded within the Civil Rights Act of 1964 provisions that prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amber Sellers, and I serve as the chair of the Human Relations Commission. On behalf of the Human Relations Commission, it is my pleasure to be here this evening to promote April as Fair Housing Month here in the city of Lawrence. In Lawrence, the Human Relations Commission is charged with endeavoring to eliminate discrimination and assist with the enforcement of Chapter 10 of the City Code, the city's equivalent of federal civil rights laws. The Lawrence Human Relations Commission was created in 1961, and the adoption of the city's first civil rights code took place in March of 1964. 2021, if your math is correct, marks the 60th anniversary of the Human Relations Commission here in Lawrence, and we plan to mark this occasion with a campaign to increase awareness about the ongoing efforts of our commission. In this moment of unparalleled crisis, fair housing justice is important more than ever. The Human Relations Commission stands committed to advancing equity in housing and increasing public awareness of everyone's right to fair housing through advocacy, enforcement, education, and outreach. As HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge declared, this fair housing justice is the time for us to recommit to our nation's obligation to ensuring that everyone has equal access to safe and affordable housing. So again, thank you, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity, and have a good night.
Mayor Finkel, I thank you so much, Amber, for those words and for serving as the chair of our Human Relations Committee and all the work that you guys do. Now I'll go ahead and read the proclamation. Whereas April 2021 marks the 53rd anniversary of the passage of the Fair Housing Act, which provides in Lawrence equal opportunity for all residents in the sale, rental, and financing of housing, and prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, age, marital status, disability, familial status, color, religion, sex or national origin, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And whereas the City of Lawrence supports efforts to eliminate discrimination in housing by working to educate all its citizens on fair housing rights and responsibilities, and through enforcement of fair housing laws, including Chapter 10 of the Code of the City of Lawrence. And whereas the month of April is officially set aside as Fair Housing Month throughout the nation, now therefore I, Brad Finkeldye, Mayor of the City of Lawrence, in conjunction with the annual national commemoration, to hereby proclaim the month of April 2021 to be Fair Housing Month in Lawrence, and ask the people of Lawrence to join me in reaffirming our obligation to fair and equal housing for every person who resides or wishes to reside in our city. Thank you very much for that, and a very important proclamation and definitely ongoing work. The third proclamation is to proclaim the month of April as Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And I'm not sure if anyone is here to speak on that before I read the proclamation. Well, seeing none, I'll go ahead and read the proclamation, and I think it speaks somewhat for itself on the importance of this issue. Whereas Sexual Assault Awareness Month calls attention to the fact that sexual trauma and abuse is widespread and impacts every person in this community. And whereas sexual assault and sexual harassment harm our community, and statistics show 1 in 5 women and 1 in 67 men will be assaulted at some point in their lives, and that 2 out of 3 sexual assaults are never reported to police. And whereas child sexual abuse prevention must be a priority to confront the reality that 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 4 girls will experience a sexual assault before the age of 18. And whereas young people experience heightened rates of sexual violence, and youth ages 12 to 17 were 2.5 times as likely to be victims of rape or sexual assault. And whereas on campus, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 16 men are sexually assaulted during their time in college. And whereas this year, Sexual Assault Awareness Month is celebrating its 20th anniversary, the theme for this year's campaign is Consent is for Everyone. The campaign calls on partners and community members to help expand sexual assault prevention efforts and to ensure the next generation fosters attitudes that promote consent, equality, and respect. Now, therefore, I, Brad Finkeldine, Mayor of the City of Lawrence, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2021 as Sexual Assault Awareness Month and encourage our citizens to join advocates and communities across the country in taking action to prevent sexual trauma and abuse. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and each day of the year is an opportunity to create change for the future. Again, thank you for that, and I do think it speaks for itself and the necessity of raising awareness of those important issues, and all three are very important issues. Okay, we'll now move to the consent agenda. All matters listed on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Members of the public wishing to speak to an item that has been pulled off consent agenda will be limited to 3 minutes for comments. Would any commissioner like to pull an item off the consent agenda? Seeing none, would any member of the public like to pull an item off the consent agenda? If so, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, or otherwise turn your camera on and indicate so Sherry can recognize you and she will call upon you. And if you're in person, you can do so as well.
Chris Flowers.
Hi, this is Chris Flowers, and I'd like to pull, I think it's C9D about declaring an emergency and adopting an ordinance, and then C8A about the scorecard. Yeah, adopting resolution 7359 C8A.
Mayor Finkeldine, thank you, Chris. Anyone else?
Do either of you want to pull a consent item? No, okay. That's it from the public, Mayor.
Mayor Finkeldine, thank you. I would look for a motion on the consent agenda.
Commissioner Ananda, I move to approve the consent agenda accepting items C8A and C9D.
Commissioner Larson, second.
Mayor Finkeldine, there's a motion by Commissioner Ananda, a second by Commissioner Lawson. Commissioner Ananda?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Shipley? Didn't hear you. Commissioner Bully?
Aye.
Mayor Finkeldine, aye. Consent agenda passes 5-0. That'll bring us to item C8A. Chris, you pulled that item. Go ahead, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Chris Flowers, and I sent in comment about this. So I'm not really going to read it all, but it just seems to me like there needs to be something about the students, like some kind of scorecard, because a few months ago, we had that economic analyst, and I guess by Ernst & Young, where it said that the biggest industry in Lawrence is the education, and like most of our economy is kind of based around the students. So I don't understand if we're going to be scoring the most important stuff, and we have an outside consultant tell us that our biggest industry in Lawrence is the college. And also when they listed strengths, they said that our university is one of our biggest strengths. So if we're going to be scoring our stuff and measuring it, why wouldn't you be like trying to look after, like measure the biggest thing of our economy? I just think that needs to be something we're looking at in the what was it, prosperity and economic security, I think. I mean, it could be also unmistakable identity, because students are what makes Lawrence. Our identity is we are a college town. And I think some people around here want to turn it into just another Johnson County suburb. And the stuff we have listed on there, that seems more, I don't know if it's leaning towards a Johnson County suburb, but some of that stuff isn't about college town, and there needs to be something about students, because our identity is we are a college town and our economy is dependent on the students. And if it's measuring our end goal, like our city plan or whatever for way in the future, then maybe we needed something in our end goal about students. I don't know. It just seems, I think what's missing in this is something about a measurement about the strength of our college life. So I would like to be measuring the number of students enrolled is what I could think might be the best. Because when enrollment's down, like if you're in retail and restaurant, I think sales are down. So, and you could say that, you know, it's more based on what KU does, but when you guys wanted to do that, raise the vaping age and nicotine age to 21, that would have had an effect, I think, on enrollment. So actions the city does. And also I listed when you guys did that police task force going after underage drinking and fake IDs, that's not helping the.
Thanks, Chris. Your 3 minutes is up.
Thank you.
Mayor Finkel, I think I'll go ahead and open it up to see if there's any other public comment on this item before we bring it back to the commissioners. So that's the case. If anyone likes to speak on this item from the public, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, or let Sherry know if you're there in person.
There's no other public comment on this item.
Mayor Finkel, I thank you, Sherry. Bring it back to the commissioners. Hi, go ahead. Danielle, do you have, I saw you turned your video on there. Did you have any comment or response that you'd like to make?
Danielle Bushcutter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. I'd be certainly happy to answer any questions that you all have related to this. I will note that there isn't a KPI to Mr. Flowers' point about directly related to students, but I do think that we will see that with the strategies that come before you here in kind of the next step of this process. And want to relay that the economic development strategic plan that was referenced being done by Ernst & Young is very much being tied to this strategic plan as well. We want those two things to really work in harmony. And a lot of the key folks involved in that economic development strategic plan are the same key folks on our prosperity and economic security team, so that we can get good alignment between those things, because we certainly want all of this to be harmonious with one another and work together, not have separate goals. So that's what I would share, but I would be happy to answer any questions that you all may have as well.
Mayor Finkeldye, thank you, Danielle. Any questions, comments, motions from the commission?
This is Commissioner Nana. I just wanted to quickly point out the acronym for Prosperity and Economic Security Team. I don't know if y'all use that, but that seems pretty good. I do think that, you know, the town-gown relation conversation is always a confusing one, or not confusing, but complicated one. And certainly working at both university as well as this role, understanding the interrelationship between the state and KBOR and the limitations that the city has, and how do we create a fertile place for those students to thrive when they do come to this community is the question I think that is before the commission when we're looking at these factors, and many of the factors on this do speak to that.
Mayor Finkel, I'd agree. I certainly don't disagree with Chris that the universities and both universities are very, very important to community and the richness and the unmistakable identity. So certainly those are things we want to focus on. I'm comfortable, as Danielle said, with our strategies here and don't think we need to KPI specifically on student enrollment, either at KU or Haskell, to measure that. But certainly it's something I think makes our community better. So, but appreciate Chris bringing those points up. But other comments or motions?
I'd move to adopt, this is Commissioner Nanda, I move to adopt resolution number 7359.
Commissioner Larson, second.
Mayor Finkel, aye. There's a motion by Commissioner Ananda, a second by Commissioner Lawson. Commissioner Ananda?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Shipley?
Aye.
Commissioner Bowley?
Aye.
Mayor Finkel, aye. Passes 5-0. We'll now move to C9A. No, let's see which. C9D. And I would, Chris, I think you pulled this as well, so you have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Chris Flowers again, and I'm just wondering what the emergency is. Like, I didn't see, I could have missed it, but I didn't see where it explained what the emergency is. It just says declare an emergency. I think it's the declaring the emergency so we can skip the second reading, it sounded like. So we just have one reading. So if we're going to be skipping like protocol, the protocol that's in place, I think, to ensure good government and not something sketchy, I'm just wondering what the emergency is. Is this something where it's about, is this an emergency or an opportunity? Is this something where we need to act fast to get the best price, or is there, and if so, if it's something where we need to act fast to get a best price, is that an actual emergency? I mean, I don't know what to do on this because I don't know what the emergency is. And if it is just an opportunity, I could be okay with it, but I just think we should list what the emergency is if we're going to be breaking protocol and not having a second reading, because that's kind of bad government, I think. If we're going to preach transparency, then if we're declaring an emergency, we should be letting the public know what the emergency is. And also, if you guys go ahead and vote for it, then I think that means you find the city's argument for this, that this is an emergency, legit. So I'm just stirring the pot on this one. Thank you.
Mayor Finkel, aye. Thank you. I'll go ahead and open it to public comment before I bring it back for a response. So if any member of the public would like to speak, other member of the public would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, or let Sherry know if you're there in person.
Go ahead.
Eric Hyde. I didn't really want to talk too much about this. I just want to say that I want to remind you what George Orwell said, and this comment specifically applies to Chris Flowers and your consideration of him, City Commission. George Orwell said, maybe it wasn't love so much that people wanted so much as to be understood. That's very close to what he was quoted as writing. So what I mean by that is I can tell that Chris Flowers is not really a sniveler like everybody thinks he is. I can tell that he is a very intelligent man, and I can tell that you guys need to respect him more. Okay? He truly cares about government, I know. I want him to run for City Commission. I don't care what anybody thinks. I don't care what anybody's prejudice towards him. You guys need to listen to him and understand him. Please, that's all.
Mayor, I just want to confirm that I didn't miss anyone on Zoom that wanted to speak to this item. I didn't see a hand raised, but I just wanted to provide one more opportunity. Okay.
Mayor Finkel, thank you.
Chad, did you want to speak to this item?
I just wanted to mention that it would be nice to know what emergency we're declaring. That's all. Thank you.
That's all the comment on this item, Mayor.
Mayor Finkel, thank you. Bring it back to the commission and go ahead and ask Jeremy to respond to some of those questions.
Absolutely. Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director for the city. Admittedly, we probably could improve on the staff report. This is something that's done fairly routinely by government. And so unfortunately, it probably falls into that sliver of, we just anticipate, or we anticipate that everybody understands what's going on. So we'll do a better job the next time of explaining this further. But essentially what happened was at 10 o'clock this morning, we accepted bids for the notes and the bonds. And those bids are only good for 24 hours. So the city does not officially accept that bid until the ordinance is adopted. And under Kansas law, ordinances are only adopted after the second reading. So the reason we're requesting the emergency is that without first and second reading tonight, we cannot accept the bids, at which point the sale becomes invalid and we have to start the whole process over again. So it's not an emergency in the sense that life or danger is present, but it is an emergency in the sense that if we don't act on the sense of urgency, our bids will no longer be valid and we'll have to reissue the sale. I'd be happy to answer any questions the commissioners may have.
Mayor, this is Commissioner Bowling. I have a question for Jeremy. What would the cost be of doing a complete reissuance if the ordinance didn't pass tonight?
Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director. I don't think I'm in a position to say that right now. There'd be minor costs in terms of publication, et cetera, but we paid our consultant, we paid Gilmore and Bell and others to prepare all these documents. They would essentially have to re-prepare them. It wouldn't be a one-for-one relationship, certainly, because we're not starting from scratch. But, if I had to ballpark it, I would say somewhere in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. My bigger concern, however, would be the difficulty of finding bidders that would be willing to settle on an amount and hold it for 2 weeks without any adjustments. I just don't think that's feasible in the bond market.
This Commissioner Bowley, the follow-up to that would be that even if we did it again, we'd still be faced with having to declare an emergency or have a completely different way of issuing the bonds, right?
Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director. That's correct. There's no way to coalesce the ordinances needing 2 separate readings with a bond process that happens in 1 day without waiving that requirement.
This Commissioner Bowley again. I appreciate your responses and the information. I do agree that it's possible we should try to communicate this in a little bit different way next time we do it.
Mayor Finkel, go ahead, Tony.
City Attorney Tony Wheeler, I want to make just a minor clarification to what Jeremy said. The requirement of having 2 readings is a local decision. That it used to be a state law, but the legislature amended it to remove that requirement. And we did propose a couple years back of removing that requirement, but the commission wanted to continue to operate with 2 readings. So that's why we're taking the action that we are tonight. But I just wanted to clarify, it's not a state law requirement anymore, but it is a local requirement.
Mayor Finkel, thank you for that clarification. And Jeremy, thank you for setting that forth. And I agree, we could probably make that a little clearer. I know we do this quite often, but it's good to have the reminder. And again, thanks, Chris, for bringing it up. I think if you have that question and you come to a lot of these meetings, other people probably have that question as well. So we Appreciate you bringing that up, Chris.
Mayor, this is Commissioner Bullock. I'd like to admit that I had that same question a number of years ago. So I'm familiar with being curious about this topic.
Mayor Finkelstein, any other comments or motions?
This is Commissioner Ananda. I would move that we declare an emergency and adopt on first and second reading ordinance number 9844 and adopt resolution number 7361.
This is Commissioner Bullock. I'll second.
Mayor Finkelstein, there's a motion by Commissioner Ananda, a second by Commissioner Bully. Commissioner Ananda?
Aye.
Commissioner Bully?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Shipley?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson?
Aye.
Mayor Finkelstein? Aye, passes 5-0. We're now going to move to general public comment. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues except those scheduled on the consent agenda or regular agenda portions of the agenda. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss or debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Individuals should address all comments and questions to the commission. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes. If you're interested in making general public comment, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, or if you're present, let Sherry know.
Maureen Murray.
Hi, I'm Maureen Murray. I'm not sure if I should ask to make my comment now. It's on the ordinance, the planned ordinance for 9828 on the ban on conversion therapy. Is this
No. Yeah, Mayor Finkelstein, thank you, Maureen. We'll take that up when we take up the agenda item.
Okay,
this is for items not on the agenda.
Chad Osdale, were you wanting to make comment on this item? Just general public comment?
Public comment, yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
First thing I was wanting to ask if we could have PIRA put on the commission's agenda and have a discussion about it. It's my feeling that it would save the city some money instead of hiring a labor lawyer and an investigator. I believe that is something that PIRA would do for free, but you could explain it to me. I could very well be wrong. Other than that, I was wondering, I've been asking the same questions for a long time, so I'm trying to figure a way to say it a little different. But I was wondering if there was anybody in the commission or anybody in city management who was able to honestly stand up and say that this is our appraisal process and this is how it is evaluated and how it is scored and how every employee is told it is done. I was wondering if anyone is able to stand up and say that this is how everybody is scored and evaluated and that they're all treated with respect and scored fairly. Anybody? I'd love to see one of you stand up and answer, but I realize there won't be, but well, thanks anyway. Other than that, I'm pretty much done. Thank you for listening anyway. Looks like I'm cutting in and out. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad.
This is Sherry Reederman, City Clerk. Is there anyone
else on Zoom that would like to provide general public comment? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Eric Hyde. I wore this and I'm taking it off. I will never wear it again. I'm getting it framed. It's got blood on it. I was attempted murder by homeless people down by the Kaw River. You can see my head. And then I'm not gonna take off my whole shirt, don't worry. And the back of my neck, I don't know if you can see that. Anyway, there's a big spot back there. They broke my C6 cervical process with an aluminum bat. They hit me at least twice in the head with an aluminum bat. I blocked one of the swings with my hand. My hand is bruised. The doctors said, and nurses said that they were so surprised that I didn't sustain a head injury. They did not say head injury, but that's what they implied. That I did not sustain a head injury or that I did not receive any other broken bones. I did not pass out once, yet I was paralyzed on the ground and I was looking at my attacker closing in for the kill like this, ready to smash my face in. I couldn't talk, but I somehow willed myself to yell stop 3 times and he stopped. He still threatened to hurt me by getting in my way as I tried to leave. I don't know how I left. I do know how I left because I wanted to, but I was wobbling around like this. Blah, blah, blah. There's more to this story. Officer Guile, I somehow found him. Officer Guile, supervising Officer Guile, my favorite police officer in the Lawrence Police Department, amazing man of a higher order, so amazing. Anyway, I found him and he helped me. The paramedics came, blah, blah, blah. I want to tell you that I went to the homeless camp on my intuition. I will never go back to any homeless camp ever again. I will never help any homeless person ever again in my life. The only way I will ever help them is by trying to understand them. I do not believe we need to support social services for the homeless anymore. We should not be supporting them at all. We should not be funding them with the city allowance or whatever, period. This is my belief. You can believe whatever you want to believe. I won't blame you. However, what I want to say but after that is that I'm sorry for yelling last time. I was really frustrated. I don't think I was completely wrong. However, I love being wrong. I love being proved wrong about things. This is something you don't understand. And one last thing I want to say about Commissioner Bully, because I don't think he gets enough respect, is that I observed him speak about trying to reduce the fees. This man is good. Commissioner Bully is good. You need to listen to him more. He is a very strong-minded, willed person. He's smart. I don't know about everything, but he's smart about that. That's it.
Thank you, Eric, and I'm glad you were able to get some help. I'm sorry to hear that. Any other public comment, Sherry?
No, that's it.
Mayor Finkeldye. Thank you. We'll now move to regular agenda item number 1. Consider adopting on first reading ordinance number 9828 prohibiting the practice of conversion therapy. Maria, are you presenting this?
Yes, I am. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Assistant City Attorney Maria Garcia, and I will be providing the staff report for this item tonight. I do have a very quick PowerPoint to just assist in the conversation and in the presentation. Just open that up. All right, so the ordinance before you tonight is a draft ordinance in the city. Before I get started on what the ordinance says and how we came about on this conversation, I wanted to quickly define what conversion therapy is. So generally, conversion therapy is defined as any practice, counseling, or purported treatment that seeks to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity, including efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions, or to eliminate or reduce sexual or romantic attractions or feelings toward individuals of the same gender. The definition, as we have drafted in the ordinance, specifically excludes counseling that provides assistance to an individual exploring identity and development or undergoing gender transition. So this item was raised by a few city commissioners very late last year. There was some interest in an ordinance that had been adopted by Roland Park, Kansas in 2020. It was last summer. To date, Roland Park remains the only city in Kansas that has an ordinance specifically prohibiting conversion therapy in the state, and it bans conversion therapy for minors specifically. And this is very similar to state laws around the country and other municipalities that have adopted similar laws. They apply specifically to persons under the age of 18. As far as other states that have passed conversion therapy laws, that is currently at 20 on a state level, and there are many more municipalities and counties that have similarly banned the practice, of course, outside of Kansas. We did have a few attempts in our Kansas legislature to ban conversion therapy in 2017, 2019, and 2020. But on each of those occasions, the bill did not make it out of committee and was unsuccessful. So the ordinance is fairly brief. It starts with findings and purpose of the governing body. And the purpose, as stated, is to prohibit a practice that has been by many professionals and entities nationally been regarded as harmful. And that language is very similar, again, to other ordinances and state statutes that have passed similar laws. It begins with, a purpose statement that states that there are many recognized organizations around the country that have deemed the practice of conversion therapy to be harmful. And some examples of that include the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, which states that conversion therapies, quote, lack scientific credibility and clinical utility. Additionally, there is evidence that such interventions are harmful. In addition, the American Academy of Pediatrics has made a similar statement stating that reparative approaches such as this have been proven to not only be unsuccessful and are considered outside the mainstream of traditional medical practice. The American Academy of Pediatrics has described reparative approaches such as this as, quote, unfair and deceptive. Additionally, the National Association of Social Workers states in a position statement that it believes that sexual orientation change efforts can negatively affect one's mental health and cannot and will not change sexual orientation or gender identity. The organization condemns the use of such practices and reaffirms its stance against therapies and treatments designed to change sexual orientation or gender identity, and against referring clients to practitioners or programs that claim to do so. And in addition to that, the American College of Physicians provided its statement on conversion therapy, stating that it opposes the use of conversion, reorientation, or reparative therapy, and stated that available research does not support the use of reparative therapy as an effective method in the treatment of LGBT persons. Evidence shows that the practice may actually cause emotional or physical harm to such individuals, particularly adolescents or young persons. And then I've also listed 4 additional organizations that have very similar statements. This list is not exhaustive. There are still other organizations that have provided very similar input. The ordinance continues after the findings and purpose to a definition section, and those definitions are meant to help guide in the understanding of what is prohibited. Those definitions are obviously subject to your review and revisions if you'd like to expand them or limit them. This would be the commission's ordinance, and so you're certainly welcome to make any revisions that you would see appropriate. After that, section 6-2104 has the language that very clearly states that conversion therapy is prohibited within the city. An additional section prohibits assisting someone to violate the law, owning a business that provides prohibited services, or purporting to provide prohibited services. And then finally, the ordinance ends with a penalty section that imposes a $500 fee on a first offense for engaging in prohibited conduct here. There is no jail time associated with that, and that is consistent with other laws that were researched on a state level and also on a municipal level, that this was a fine or civil penalty only. Oops. And that was it for just some opening remarks. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mayor Finkel, I thank you. Do we have any questions for Maria?
This is Commissioner Ananda. I wanted to look at the definitions for just a second. LGBTQ is defined as a person who is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and/or questioning. Generally, the Q in LGBTQ stands for queer, which is a catch-all for various sexual orientations, such as pansexual. And so I think that when looking at the definition of what is commonly used for lesbian or gay or bisexual, those are very specific sexual orientations that wouldn't necessarily encompass those other identities. And so I wanted to see about adding queer to that. And I think that there was under sexual orientation as well, adding queer to that.
Assistant City Attorney Mary Garcia, thank you. That's an excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up. In the research, I did see that questioning was used on occasion. Sometimes it was and or questioning in combination with queer, but that additional word is definitely something that we could add to the definition section.
Mayor Finkel, other questions? Maria, there was, I guess I have a question. You said about 20 states have these sorts of statutes. Is the definition of conversion therapy very similar to what the states use? I mean, I know there's been some correspondence that maybe it's too broad or whatever. I just wanted to see how it compared to some of the other states and municipalities that you looked at.
Assistant City Attorney Maria Garcia. Actually, when I was researching this initially, I was surprised to find that the great majority of state statutes and ordinances on this topic are substantially similar, that they have used each other's drafts. In fact, sometimes not word for word, but very, very similar. And so the answer to your question is most definitely the definition of conversion therapy here is very similar to other ways that other jurisdictions have defined it.
Mayor Finkel, I thank you for that. And I know there's also an exclusion for clergy. I assume that's in the definition of provider, that's common as well.
Assistant City Attorney Maria Garcia, I would not say that it's common. I did find it in other ordinances. For example, Minneapolis, Minnesota excluded it from its definition. But even though the word religion or clergy was not mentioned in other laws, the definition of provider was very specific to mean somebody who provides a medical service or somebody who is otherwise licensed to provide that service.
Mayor Finkel, I thank you for that clarification. Other questions before we open it to public comment? Mayor Finkel, I see none. We'll open it up to public comment. If this is an item you'd like to give public comment on, we'd like you to raise your hand using the raise your hand feature. And Shay will call upon you. And if you're in person, you can let her know that as well.
This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. I just want to start by apologizing if I do not get anyone's name correct. The first individual I'm going to start with is Inoru Wade.
Hello. That was close enough. Good evening, and thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. My name is Nora Wade. I'm a PhD student at the University of Kansas's School of Public Affairs and Administration. I'm the Vice President of the Kansas City Center for Inclusion and the founder of the Midwest Rainbow Research Institute. My research agenda focuses on LGBTQIA populations and their relationship with governmental entities across the Midwest. I'm here today to speak in favor of the proposed policy change to outlaw so-called conversion therapy on minors. Having lived in Lawrence as well as what feels like a professional student, I realize and can attest to Lawrence being a very open and affirming community for those within the LGBTQI community. Because of this point, many people will say that what I'm asking of the commission is not necessary because an open and affirming community would not have instances of conversion therapy being practiced. Bluntly, I'm essentially being told that this doesn't happen here. This, of course, would be welcomed by any LGBTQI person's ear and bring comfort to open and affirming parents of LGBTQI children. However, simply because it does not happen here doesn't mean it won't happen here. And because of that, it falls upon us to ensure that it can't happen here. Conversion therapy might sound like a relic of history, not a prime matter of concern for the numerous crises we are facing at this particular moment. Many people might not even understand what it is, how it works, or its historical lineage. I do. Conversion therapy's birth and legacy is not really a product of the United States, but rather it's a relic of World War II and Nazi experimentation on gay individuals imprisoned and marked with a pink triangle during the Holocaust. At the conclusion of World War II, conversion therapy made its way to the United States as a way to combat America's growing, quote, gay problem. A sudden rise in legislatures passing sexual psychopath laws led to LGBTQIA people being arrested and sent to psychiatric institutions for treatment to fix their sexual orientation. The number of children and adults that come to the community center who have been through this barbaric and torturous practice are too high. It is, in fact, a relic of history that has no place within any modern city, state, or nation. It is ineffective in its stated goals and can actually lead to increased depression, self-harm, substance abuse, and even suicide. So I'm asking that you all vote in favor of outlawing this practice. We tend to think of policy as rules and regulations, but policy is also a reflection of our community values. And by outlawing this practice, the City of Lawrence would be reaffirming its values as an open and affirming home to all LGBTQIA people. Thank you.
Marciana Vequist.
My name is Marciana Vequist, and I'm a licensed psychologist with a private practice in Lawrence. Thank you for the opportunity to make a statement on Ordinance 9828, which will ban the use of conversion techniques with minors. I strongly support this ordinance. In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from its diagnostic manual because it is widely known that a minority sexual orientation is not a mental disorder that could be cured or treated. Sexual orientation involves an individual's sense of identity based on their attraction to men, women, or more than one gender. In 2013, the American Psychiatric Association removed gender identity disorder from the diagnostic manual. Gender identity refers to a person's basic sense of being male, female, or of indeterminate sex, and every person has a gender identity. The American Psychological Association, in agreement with the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, the American College of Physicians, the American Counseling Association, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychoanalytic Association, the American School Counselor Association, the American School Health Association, the National Association of Social Workers, the World Psychiatric Association, and the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration opposes the use of techniques intended to change sexual orientation from gay, lesbian, or bisexual to heterosexual because such techniques are not needed. There is no credible scientific evidence that they work, and there is a significant potential that they could cause harm to participants. Many who offer change efforts are not licensed mental health practitioners, and it is unclear what, if any, training or education they may have received to represent themselves as qualified. As of January 2018, an estimated 57,000 LGBTQ youth will undergo this practice from a religious or spiritual advisor. It's not appropriate to refer to conversion techniques as real therapy because they're based on the assumption that LGBTQ lifestyles are bad and not a normal part of the spectrum of gender expression or identity. A technique or therapy which defines a specific treatment outcome, such as the gender or sexual orientation conformity, is coercive, can be harmful, and is not an appropriate mental health treatment. Efforts to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity can encourage people to hide these aspects of their identity, which can lead to mental health problems such as depression, sexual orientation, low self-esteem, and suicide. For these reasons and many others, I'm asking you to vote to adopt Ordinance 9828. Thank you.
Chris Flowers.
Hi, this is Chris Flowers, and I support this, but my question is, does this just go after the therapist, or does this go after parents also? Because in Lawrence, I think the bigger threat's going to be parents, because if we disallow therapists from doing it, what's to stop the parents just from taking their kid to someone in Topeka or Kansas City? I know I don't know what the answer is, but it sounds like that conversion therapy is basically psychological abuse. And if we're going to say this is psychological abuse, shouldn't we be doing something to protect the kids from their parents? If we had a problem where parents were abusing the kids, but someone else was part of it also, would we just go after them, or wouldn't we also go after the parents? So I don't know what the answer to that is, but maybe it's just adding something so that it is psychological abuse. Maybe that gives child welfare ammunition to go after them or try to get them to stop. I don't know if it's something we do or the county, but it just seems I'd like to have something about what we can do with parents taking their kids, because I think that's a bigger threat to Lawrence. Because if a therapist did it, I think there'd be a lot of protesters. I think he'd just go to some other town where they're not as liberal to do his practice. I think parents would just go there. So that's why I think the parents is like the bigger issue in this. But I fully support what we have now. So just throwing that out there. Thank you.
Maureen Murray.
My name is Maureen Murray. I did send a written comment earlier today. I'm not sure, would the commissioners have been able to read that? Okay. Then I would just say that I would ask that you not adopt this ordinance tonight on first reading, that you honor the tradition. It sounds like there's a tradition of at least having 2 readings. And that you consider really being more specific in the definition of conversion therapy. I appreciated the attorney's comments that substantially that definition is the same across the board at the different states and municipalities. However, I think because the only exemption, it looks to me like it's for pastors, there could be a case where there's a faith-based school or a faith-based situation where a licensed therapist is needed who belongs to that faith-based organization, and that person should have the same exemption that the pastor would, because the pastor doesn't necessarily have the correct therapeutic experience or knowledge. So I just ask that be considered, that be broadened beyond just the pastors to pastoral workers. Some denominations don't have women in their pastorships. They would maybe have a women therapist or counselor. I'm sorry, I'm not timing myself. So I ask that you not pass it tonight, but consider being more specific in the wording of the definition of conversion therapy. I had a third point. I think the third point is simply that with the gender expression and gender fluid, there's so much fluidity that when we're speaking specifically about minors, if a minor doesn't know, is questioning and they're transitioning from one gender to another, or then they have questions about how do I transition back. I just think there can be a lot of confusion, and a well-meaning licensed therapist who's already being regulated by the NASW or the American Psychological Association or the American Medical Association, they're already being under the scrutiny of a licensed agency, that I don't think these people are going to be doing these horrible things that had been done in the past, and certainly not, what was done in Nazi Germany. And I have no problem with obviously outlawing any of those things, but I just think in terms of conversation and typical conversational therapy, that there could be some questions that could be resolved if the definition were a little more clear. Okay, thank you for your time.
Sherry Reederman, City Clerk, is there anyone else on Zoom that would like to speak to this item? If so, please use the raise your hand feature or turn on your video and just raise your hand. Okay.
Hello, Eric Hyde. Love, there's a camera. Love, great.
Incidental, beautiful questions. LGBTQ. All right. I support homosexuality. I support bisexuality. I support all sexuality. Well, not all sexuality. I do not support bestiality. And I do not support having sex with underage children. That is horrible. Let's see here. There's other sexuality that I do not support. However, I want to say that if you make this a totalitarian scheme to ban conversion therapy, that is an infringement on Lawrencians' rights. And why do I say that? I say that because there are people that do not want to be a certain way. For instance, I was raped when I was 19. I thought I was gay. I thought I was bisexual after I thought I was gay. I'm not gay or bisexual. I converted myself back to heterosexuality. I came out of that closet, excuse me for saying that. Now, I would like to also remind you that you are completely wrong about Nazi Germany. I have done a vast research on Nazi Germany. They did not target only Hebrews. They targeted mainly Christians and Catholics. That's why the Pope was against them. That's why they redesigned all the Catholic and Christian churches during Nazi Germany. There were not as many Hebrews died in Nazi Germany as you think they did. So quit using false facts about World War II and Nazi Germany. Please do your research. Do not just repeat what others say. Do your research before you say things. However, I agree that we should ban conversion therapy at least halfway. We should find a happy medium so people can have it and people cannot have it. We should not have a totalitarian all 100% ban. That is against people's rights. Completely. Not completely, halfway, so I would say. So ban it, but also allow it. Somehow, figure it out. Your commissioners, do it. Don't just... And lastly, I have 20 seconds. Something I forgot to say, there are some people that are homeless that have gender issues as well that we need to support, whatever which way they want to go. However, I believe we should totally, completely ban the homeless parking camping ordinance in the city so we can get the homeless people out of the camp so they stop harassing people, which I know people are often complaining about in the city. Thank you.
That's all the public comment on this item, Mayor.
Mayor Finkeldye, thank you. I'll bring it back to the commission for comments, questions, discussion.
This is Commissioner Larson. I would ask Maria if she could talk about the conversion therapy definition a little bit more. Because what I read is it does allow for therapeutic services to be used just to explore identity and development. So if she could help me better understand that, I appreciate it, considering what Ms. Murray said. Ms. Murray.
Assistant City Attorney Maria Garcia. Yes, I'm looking at the definition of conversion therapy, and Commissioner Larson, you stated it very well. The definition is fairly broad. It means, again, any practice, counseling, or purported treatment that seeks to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity, including efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions, or to eliminate or reduce sexual or romantic attractions or feelings toward individuals of the same gender. And there is a specific exception that is seen in other similar laws around the country, and that is that it is not conversion therapy to provide counseling or assistance to an individual who is exploring their identity and development or undergoing gender transition. And so there is that specific exemption carved out for somebody who needs assistance exploring those factors.
Commissioner Larson, thank you, Maria.
This is Commissioner Ananda. Can you help me understand why clergy are exempted from this? Assistant City Attorney Maria Garcia. We did
really consider strongly whether to add that specific language about clergy and because it doesn't exist in all laws that we looked at. Again, I pointed out Minneapolis, Minnesota as one. Otherwise, the laws around the country are just have a very specific definition of provider. And when you read it, it would encompass only those people who are specifically listed. But the reason that we added language about religion or clergy is to attempt to avoid a potential First Amendment argument on the grounds of infringing on free exercise of religion. And really, that's the reason we were looking at First Amendment. I'm sorry for the pause. I was looking at my notes to make sure that I had mentioned everything I wanted to say about that.
This is Commissioner Ananda. I would prefer to remove that language. Personally, I think that when we're talking about more than 2 times rate of suicide for folks who are subjected to this therapy, I'm not willing to carve out an exception for clergy to engage in this.
Mayor Finkel, I guess my question for you, Maria, if we took that last section out, the first part only makes it apply to folks with a license. So would it cover religious even if we take that out?
Somebody in the clergy or providing this service as part of a religious, in a religious manner would be, let me think about that. If we remove them, then the ordinance would not apply to them because unless they would be licensed under Chapter 65, I had to think about that, but even removing that would not penalize such persons from engaging in there. Could be language added specific about how even in addition to people who are licensed under Chapter 65, it could include clergy or, the language that's in the draft as also being a provider. But again, the reason that we left that out was to avoid potential issues with First Amendment.
Mayor Finkel, let me ask that question, make sure the different ways. So that, again, looking at the different states, you're saying, I think what you said earlier was most common is a definition of provider that relates to licenses. And then in a few occasions, they also add this additional exception.
That's correct.
Mayor Finkel, I thank you for that explanation.
Vice Mayor Shipley, Maria, I'm not finding it, so I'm wondering if maybe I read it in a different ordinance, but I seem to recall somewhere specifically saying that doing it specifically for money, it seemed like there was the business portion of it was being singled out in a way. And I wondered if that also might help us in this gray area.
Assistant City Attorney Maria Garcia. There is language in some other municipalities. Roland Park is coming to mind that this service is prohibited when the provider is getting paid for the service. Roland Park specifically has a business license within its city, and so it is regulating this conduct as part of the business license. And so if somebody is getting money for the service, then in that case, it can be penalized. But it is not in this draft ordinance, but it is in some other municipalities.
This is Commissioner Ananda. Wouldn't a clergy member engaging in this kind of treatment be unlicensed practice?
Perhaps. If they are purporting to provide a service that they're licensed to provide, then I think that very well could be.
This is Commissioner Ananda. Again, I would prefer to remove the exception for clergy, and I would also argue that if they're engaging in the unlicensed practice of therapeutic services, then that's also a problem that should be addressed.
This is Commissioner Boley. I support the ordinance, but I'm very reluctant to insert the city in between the relationship between a someone in the clergy and a member of their congregation.
This is Commissioner.
Commissioner,
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Larson.
yeah, Commissioner Larson, would that have any, the fact that, you know, we have a separation of church and state, is that a potential problem if we take it out or leave it in? Would we be violating that?
Assistant City Attorney Maria Garcia, I can't say for sure whether such language would be challenged in the city. I can tell you that on occasion, ordinances and state laws across the country have been challenged for various reasons, and courts have, you know, been split on topics outside, not just necessarily this religious piece, but these are ordinances that do on occasion get challenged. And so I think that making it very specific or including or excluding certain groups would need to be really thoroughly thought out and perhaps researched in addition.
Thank you.
This is Commissioner Ananda. I think that, you know, the protected class within our city of gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation takes precedence for me when it's likely to be their death as a result of engaging in this. So again, I think that we can remove that without violating those items. I feel pretty firm about that, I guess. And that protected class of those children who are being exposed to that, who are again more than twice as likely to commit suicide, with already abhorrent rates of student suicide for transgender youth particularly, but also LGBT youth who are more likely to end up homeless. To engage in that within this community is frankly abhorrent. You're muted, Courtney.
Nice. Yeah.
I unmuted myself. Vice Mayor Shipley, sorry, everyone. I'm gonna try to be sure I understand a couple points I think the mayor and Commissioner Ananda have made. If I understand them right. They're both attorneys, so they're way over my head, I'm sure. That if clergy is not mentioned here, they would still be exempt in as much as they are not trained professionals who are licensed.
Assistant City Attorney Maria Garcia. So the ordinance currently states in section 6-2104 that it shall be unlawful for any provider to provide conversion therapy to a minor. It's not any person to provide it. And so if the definition of provider is amended to exclude or delete that last sentence referring to members of the clergy, then it would still prohibit anyone licensed under Chapter 65 from providing conversion therapy. I'm not sure that it would necessarily prohibit clergy as well from providing conversion therapy, just because the way that it's currently written is that it's unlawful for a provider. And so like I said, if the point or the desire of the commission is to specifically state that conversion therapy can also not be provided by clergy, then that language would need to be more direct in there as opposed to just the language exempting it. I think that it relates to a question that you had earlier, Mayor, and your question was removing the last sentence really accomplishing what Commissioner Ananda was looking for.
This is Commissioner Ananda. I will acknowledge that it doesn't bar clergy from engaging in that practice, but for the fact that they're practicing without a license, which is at their own risk and subject to penalty should that be discovered.
Right.
Mayor Finkeldine, Maria, I know you said you went back and forth on whether or not to put that second sentence in. I guess I wanted to hear one more time why in the end you decided to do that.
It was something that was considered very thoughtfully on whether to add that language. And I did notice that it's not the most common language for defining a provider. The reason that I added it in there was another jurisdiction had it, and it seemed like a reasonable way to avoid potential arguments challenging the ordinance on First Amendment grounds. And that's really the heart of it. It was a legal matter, weighing the risk of it. And so we decided to include it.
Mayor Finkelstein, other comments or questions by commissioners? Further discussion?
Commissioner Larson, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this, the provider part of it. So the ordinance states that it's unlawful for any provider to provide conversion therapy to a minor. So if you aren't licensed under Chapter 65, you're just a average business person with no licenses, could they still do conversion therapy without breaking this ordinance?
Likely not. I'm sorry, Assistant City Attorney Maria Garcia. So the way that provider is defined at the end of the first sentence states, and any professional licensed under Chapter 65, but it also includes someone who is licensed, certified, or a registered, counselors, psychologists, clinical social workers, family therapists, psychiatrists, certified substance abuse counselors, certified school counselors, behavior analysts, and any professional licensed under Chapter 65. So a person would not necessarily have a license under Chapter 65, but could be a school counselor, for example. They would be considered a provider under this language.
Okay, so does this include just anybody off the street who wants to, who feels as though they need to get into this business of conversion therapy without any license at all? Does this prevent that?
No, it does not, because the definition of provider specifically states that that person would be licensed, certified, or registered to provide particular services. So it would not include just any person in the city.
Commissioner Larson, thank you.
Mayor Finkelstein, again, Maria, but that definition of provider is something that's used most commonly.
That Assistant City Attorney Maria Garcia, our language is a little bit different in this draft, of course, because we're referencing Chapter 65, and that is unique to Kansas. And so that language is not across the board in all of the states and municipalities that we looked at. It is very similar to how other jurisdictions have defined provider, but not identical. I'll add also, I'm looking at the Roland Park example that the commission was interested in, and their definition is very, very similar. And it references Chapter 65 as well as licensed medical or mental health professionals, counselors, family therapists, etc.
Mayor Finkelstein, other comments, questions, motions, thoughts?
This is Commissioner Hernandez. Before we opened it to public comment, I had also mentioned the possibility of adding the word queer to the definition of sexual orientation as well as LGBT. And I wanted to see what commissioners thought about that.
Mayor Finkelstein, first, we've already had public comment, so we're good there, but I certainly had no problem. Certainly adding queer and changing that, I certainly support that.
Commissioner Larson, I'm fine with that change.
Mayor Finkel, I guess on the definition provider, I would, I think I'd defer to staff and the research they did on it, and leave it as proposed, would be my preference.
This is Commissioner Ananda. Maria, is there any risk by making an exception for clergy when we've defined this how we have of giving them permission to operate without a license?
You, Assistant City Attorney Maria Garcia, could you rephrase that? I'll look at the definition while you're asking.
This is Commissioner Ananda. Did I cut out? Did my question get through?
It did, and I asked if you could rephrase it. I was going to pull up the definition of provider.
Okay.
You asked what the risk was related to
Thank you.
the language.
Okay, so this is Commissioner Ananda. The question that I asked is, are we at risk for basically giving permission to clergy to operate without a license, given the definition that we've used of conversion therapy, because that would require a license in order to engage it? So by exempting them, are we giving them permission to operate without a license, or is there a risk of being perceived in that way?
I mean, you know, there may be risk. How high the risk is, I'm really not sure. The language currently for provider is that it is not a provider for members of the clergy who are acting in. I think that was to clarify that this is somebody who is not acting necessarily with the Chapter 65 licensed or somebody else. It states, and who are not performing under the authority of a license issued by any regulatory board under Chapter 65 of Kansas statutes. And so perhaps there is risk. I think that, you know, we could make a good argument for removing the language or keeping it in. Again, this was a recommendation. So, you know, I can say again that these types of ordinances have been challenged on occasion, but it is your ordinance. And so you could evaluate potential risk versus, you know, the language that you would want to include. I'm not sure that's very helpful. I mean, all I can say is it's unknown at this time whether it would be challenged and on what grounds, but there is always a possibility that it might be, no matter what the language states.
This is Commissioner Boley. You know, it's my perception that counseling is part of a clergy person's role at times, and that they're not needing a license to do counseling as part of their role. If I'm wrong, I'd like to hear about it.
Mayor?
Sorry, Mayor, I'm trying to unmute you. Tony, would you like to say something? Sorry.
City Attorney Tony Wheeler. Commissioners, if you would prefer to have additional legal advice on this, we're certainly happy to have that discussion, but we would prefer to have that discussion in executive session.
Mayor Finkel, so it looks like maybe we have obviously have several options. We can defer this to another date to talk more about it and get some more legal advice. Or I guess we could adopt it as written, or we could go ahead, I guess, and adopt it with a change. But what are folks thinking here?
This is Commissioner Boley. It's possible we could adopt it on first reading, do an executive session, and should make whatever changes are needed on second reading.
This is Commissioner Ananda. I guess I'll make clear this isn't about the legal arguments for me. I think that we could have risky legal arguments either way. And the way that I'm willing to lean is saving lives, particularly for children. And leaving out a sentence changes this not at all. And that's really important to me. So that is where I sit on this, regardless of where other folks sit at this moment.
This is Commissioner Larson, and I'm just kind of struggling this definition of provider, because I don't understand why members of the clergy include members of the clergy is in this particular definition, when if they're not licensed or don't fall under Chapter 65, really it's a moot point. They're not covered under this as a provider. So I do not understand for that reason. I mean, they're going to provide their services as they see fit, according to their religious beliefs. But at the same time, I struggle with getting in between a pastor, a preacher, or priest and their congregate. I struggle with that.
This Commissioner Bully, I guess, we've had suggestion from council that we discuss the legal issues in executive session. I think we need to respect that. I guess I would suggest that we consider approving it on first reading and have an executive session to be able to resolve, or we could defer.
Commissioners, I'd be fine with deferring it, and if staff believes we need an executive session on it, then go from there.
Commissioner Bully, I move to defer and schedule an executive session.
Commissioner Larson, I second.
Mayor Fingeldine, there's a motion and a second to defer. Are there any other comments before we take that vote? I just want to make sure. If not, Commissioner Bully?
Sorry, Mayor,
Aye.
is there a specific time you're wanting to defer this to? Sorry, Sherry Reederman, City Clerk. I mean, are you just deferring this to the next meeting, or?
This Commissioner Bully, I would suggest expeditious handling of this. Yes.
Okay. Mayor Fingeldine, there was a motion and a second. It was moved by Commissioner Bully, seconded by Commissioner Lawson. So Commissioner Bully?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Shipley?
Aye.
Commissioner Ananda?
Nay.
Mayor Finkeldine, aye. Passes 4-1 to defer and to have an executive session expeditiously. Thank you for that item. We will move now to item number 2, which is to receive an update on the 12 goals of the criminal justice and social justice reform identified by the City Commission in June 2020. And Brandon, do you have the start of this?
Yes, excuse me. Yes, this is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. And I may, just before I start, ask if Commissioner Ananda wants to provide any preliminary comments. Otherwise, I'll go ahead with my presentation as I've planned it.
This is Commissioner Ananda. Go ahead, Brandon. Thank you.
Great, yeah. So again, Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I wanted to take this opportunity, kind of following up on some discussion over the last couple weeks with the City Commission about the 12 item work plan that was identified last June. And really, this is just a relatively informal presentation to provide an update in discussion around those items. And I want to provide some context about ongoing work that directly links to many of the items on that list. Just to clarify, there is no action item associated with the agenda report or any of the individual work items on the list tonight. I want to make it more conversational to provide an opportunity for the commissioners to discuss the list. So please jump in with questions or additional comments as you wish as I go through the report. And I will also ask and defer a little bit throughout the update to Captain Trip McKinley, who's on the call tonight, as well as Commissioner Nanda, to provide some additional perspective from their work within the Police Department and Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, respectively. And so without further ado, I will attempt to share my screen. And Porter, I assume that I can just do that as usual.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so it looks like we're there. So my plan tonight is just to walk through the report, which is available through the link, the attachment link on the agenda memo for this item. And so for task number 1, which is the decriminalization of behaviors related to houselessness, drug use or addiction, mental health, and non-person crimes, and removal of those fines associated with the items. I want to highlight kind of a theme that you'll hear throughout this update, which is that work on this particular item, while there may be some work in parallel that's ongoing through existing avenues, much of the work we would anticipate to occur after we receive our police consultant report. So just as a general reminder to anybody paying attention to this presentation, we have engaged a consultant, and that occurred last October, Citygate Associates out of California. They are an objective third-party expert consultant providing public safety and police expertise. And so they have been working diligently over the last several months on an extensive analysis of our police department. We actually just received a mid-project briefing that provided more or less kind of the structure of the report that we can anticipate, and some preliminary talking points from the consultant about themes that they've identified that they plan on presenting recommendations on. We did intentionally scope much of these tasks, much of this list, into that project, and I was happy to hear in that mid-project briefing that a lot of the themes in their report really do align nicely with this list. So that was a good update that we had on that, and you'll hear me reference that report several times related to each of these tasks. And so this one in particular is one that we do have. We do have a number of avenues ongoing, whether it's the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council or some of the behavioral and mental health initiatives that are really being convened by our county partners. But this is one in particular where we would anticipate additional work coming after we've received that consultant report within approximately the next 45 to 60 days. And I will say there's a typo on this particular, on this first item. I apologize for that. The intention there before we uploaded it to the agenda was to provide a statement about the camping ordinance, which was revised last year, earlier, which does provide to some extent some decriminalization of camping that may have previously been prohibited. Task number 2 was to establish a mental health and addiction crisis response team and reallocate funds from law enforcement to partners or employees in these areas to address these issues. So I will say there is a lot of work going on in the behavioral, mental health, and addiction space. Much of that work is convened by Douglas County and is done in collaboration with multiple community partner agencies, whether that's Burt Nash or some of the lead agencies serving our county, as well as other counties and other communities in the addiction field. And so the police consultant, Citygate Associates, they have done an extensive stakeholder engagement and community listening process. We were intentional about connecting them, particularly with two of the county coordinators in this space, Bob Tryansky, who is working as the behavioral health coordinator with the county, and Mike Brower, who is working as the criminal justice coordinator with the county. And the consultants did a deep dive, did deep dive interviews with the coordinators, as well as some of the organizations that they work collaboratively with. And we do anticipate receiving some substantial analysis and discussion about our community's aspirational goals related to mental health, addiction, and our abilities to provide expert and well-trained, informed response to people who are experiencing crisis. And we would also expect them to really provide some analysis about where we're at currently as a community and what it's going to take to get to where they hear that we want to go. I anticipate a lot more discussion coming once we receive that report, especially discussion about prioritization of effort and resources to accomplish some of the goals in this space. Task number 3 is stated as law enforcement should not respond to other city ordinance violations, including complaints about noise, lawns, or vehicles, allocating these violations or complaints to relevant departments or a single department that responds to such issues, along with proportional funding dedicated to these events. This is one where there's kind of an interesting phenomena in that there has been quite a bit of incremental shifting of what would historically or traditionally be a law enforcement response in Lawrence to a non-law enforcement, non-uniformed or non-sworn employee who's responding to either requests for service or I guess first contacts with people seeking assistance from the city with some sort of lower, what I would consider lower level type offenses or of ordinance violations. And so I will say that the police consultants report will provide us with quite a bit of context that will help us identify what additional tasks and services we should target for taking off of sort of the police plate, the traditional police law enforcement response plate. And we look forward to having that discussion. But I wanted to invite Captain McKinley to just provide some comments about the recent history related to alternative response in some of these lower level areas, lower level offense areas, and give some context for what's gone on here in the last several years and kind of where we stand today. So Captain McKinley, if you want to jump in, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Brandon. This is Captain Trent McKinley, the Lawrence Police Department. To kind of expand a little bit on what you've touched on, this has been an incremental process. I'll go back to the middle of the year of 2017. In 2017, we moved 1 parking control manager, 6 parking employees, and 10 crossing guard part-time employees out of from underneath the police umbrella, move those to municipal services. And so we have been moving some things such as enforcement of downtown meters and things like that away from the police department and to other departments. That particular shift was in combination with looking at the overall downtown parking and management of that and kind of tying all those projects in together. So it made good sense to make that move at the time. Also about the same time, we were coordinating quite a bit with codes enforcement. So oftentimes when people don't know who to call, they do call the police and will relate a number of concerns that they may have. Some of those concerns have to do with property management code, graffiti, trash, and other things such as vehicles parked in a backyard and those sorts of things. Those are handled by the city's planning and development services through codes enforcement. And we have coordinated those tasks for a number of years. Much of that was person-to-person coordination. But in recent years, we've also tied in some automation to that through the city's Lawrence Listens webpage. So we have a webpage. We also have an app where individuals can come in and report certain things such as abandoned vehicles, vandalism, graffiti, signs and signals issues. Again, these were things that traditionally had been handled by and large, at least on the onset, by the police department. So these tools have also helped us kind of move some of these things out away from the police department realm to other city departments that can assist with that. Also, I'll touch on a couple of other civilian type things the police department's been doing. We've brought some part-time individuals into the police department that are civilians. These civilians are doing some things such as assisting our investigations groups. One assists our directed investigations and helps us provide additional work on case clearance, case status, follow-up with individuals. We've also has one civilian investigator that's working with the Special Victims Unit. So the Special Victims Unit, if you're not familiar with that, is a unit that's assigned to complete follow-up investigations on sexual assaults, things like that. We've brought in victim advocates, and we're working to pair those part-time civilian employees with other specialists in that field to provide some wraparound services there. We also have a civilian individual that has been a long-term employee with the police department, worked as an animal control officer for a period of time, and then came in and answered non-emergency calls over the phone. We've transitioned that employee to what we've kind of dubbed as a mobile teleserve, a civilian employee who actually goes out and handles some non-emergency, urgent or dangerous type of calls for police service. So maybe to come out and collect a piece of evidence, maybe to go and retrieve a video that an individual has recorded of a crime, that sort of thing. So they are, again, civilians. They're not driving police marked vehicles. They're driving vehicles that are marked as City of Lawrence, and they're supplementing those police services in a civilian role. We also have civilians that are serving as evidence custodians, evidence collection specialists, and civilian public affairs. So all of those positions also were handled by our sworn staff in the past. So we're doing some transition work to bring some civilian positions in and also move some of our sworn positions or positions that had previously been under the police department to other city departments, as we did with the MSO example. And then lastly, I'll just touch on what Brandon touched on with task number 2 that relates to mental illness and what we're doing to work with that population. As you're probably aware, for a number of years, since probably about 2014, we worked very hard to get our officers CIT trained so that officers can respond to individuals that are in mental health crisis. In addition to that, a model that has been very popular across the country is a co-responder model. If you're not familiar with that, that is pairing a mental health clinician who is a civilian with a law enforcement officer so that we can co-respond to some of those situations. So again, having that civilian specialist who is there and on scene, not only to handle the in-progress things, but to handle some of those follow-up calls as well, and to use some of the services and support that worker has with the Burton Ash program and other types of services that we may be able to transition that person to or get that person support with. So, and that program has been in effect since June of 2017. And that is a position that is funded out of the police department's budget. So, Brandon, did I miss anything else that you wanted me to touch on?
No, I think that's it. Thank you, Captain McKinley. Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. And I think the takeaway there related to task number 3 is that there has been quite a bit of work done on transitioning services that may have previously been addressed by a uniformed law enforcement officer to civilian staff. And so I think what we would look forward to is the Citygate report, which will provide more of a focused, intentional, strategic plan for how we make additional advancements in that regard. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities to do that the police department and all of my discussions have been very open to. So I'm optimistic about the future related to that particular task. These next few I'll probably skim through relatively quickly because they've more or less been checked off from the staff perspective. So this is more of just kind of a check-in to make sure we have a consistent understanding with the commissioners. Task 4 states Community Police Review Board and Human Relations Commission should meet and provide an opportunity for the community to engage in the conversations. The board should be urged to consider the use of 8 Can't Wait, Campaign Zero, and GARE as resources and guides through this process. I know that each of the boards met separately last summer and received presentations on the GARE, Government Alliance on Race and Equity Toolkit. There has been a number of work products that have come out since that from both of those boards, including the HRC's survey on systemic racism, the Community Police Review Board working on a comprehensive rewrite of its authorizing ordinance. And as part of that process, the Police Review Board conducting a Lawrence Listens engagement survey, which it actually received one of the highest response rates of any of our Lawrence Listen surveys to date. So for purposes of that task, staff considers that essentially complete. Task number 5 was for the city to actively engage with Douglas County in discussions to reduce the jail population. And I think that we would point back to last July when the criminal justice coordinator from the county came and presented to the city commission on this particular item. Since that time, shortly after that time, the city manager joined the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council and is an active member and participant in those meetings. And I would just point to the fact that this work really is ongoing and coordinated at the county level, with the city staff and city commission being a key and major stakeholder through that CJCC process. Task number 6 was to authorize the mayor to commit to the Obama Foundation's Mayor Challenge. That did occur shortly after the list was published. And I would also say that our consultant study really fulfills much of the 4 commitments related to that challenge. It's not, obviously their process, their study is not quite as narrowly scoped to focus pretty narrowly on use of force policies, but analysis of the use of force policy is certainly a part of that study. It's just a much more broad engagement process. So from the staff perspective, for purposes of this list, we do consider this task to be complete. Task number 7 was to plan and conduct a listening session with the city commission and community members, where community members can share ideas on how to move on this action plan. Again, we stated back in October when we hired Citygate Associates that we were going to drive this action plan through that contract, through that consultant study. And we designed a public listening and public engagement process, and as well as some of our internal stakeholders with employees and elected and appointed officials to get a lot of face time with the consultant. We are proud of the engagement process that we were able to pull off. It certainly wasn't without some bumps and bruises and definitely some takeaway lessons for how we can do it even better next time. This is not an engagement process that would be comparable to most of our other engagement processes when you think about land use, zoning, or infrastructure projects, or even Parks and Rec master planning. This was a very unique process in that people were invited to participate, and their participation really drew on their own very personal experiences, and we had some very, very vulnerable conversations in those listening forums. So for that reason, this was not an overly public process. We wanted to provide appropriate space for people to be able to share their stories and speak very candidly with the consultants. But we did offer a couple of open forums where community members could engage in that public engagement process, as well as a phone number for a voice mailbox and an email address. And I know that the email address in particular, which is monitored exclusively by the consultants and not by city staff, has actually garnered quite a bit of input. So we were very intentional about the design of the public listening process as part of the study, and we feel like largely this task has been completed as a result of that process. Task number 8 was to pursue accreditation of law enforcement, or CALEA, which is the accreditation through the Commission on Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies. We are planning on undertaking that, have been for a while. We aren't necessarily dependent on the consultant study to begin that process. That process honestly has been ongoing for a while. I would even point to several of the design elements in the police facility as being requisites for the accreditation itself. And so for purposes of this tracking list, we consider this task to be complete. Task number 9 was to revisit the requirements to be appointed as members of the Community Police Review Board. I will say that the board last September, I believe it was, forwarded a recommendation to the City Commission to expand the membership. The City Commission returned that recommendation to the board with the direction to prepare a comprehensive set of recommendations, and also to engage city staff, community members, and the police consultant. The board has since undertaken a project to comprehensively redraft their authorizing ordinance. They have taken a vote to confirm that they have completed their draft. But since that point, they have conducted the Lawrence Listens engagement process. And over the next month or two, I expect them to work through the substantial volume of feedback they've received in response to that Lawrence Listens survey related to this draft ordinance. The city staff recommendation related to this particular task is that they take time to process that feedback from the community specific to the ordinance, as well as wait and consider the consultant's report, which will specifically provide some analysis about systems of accountability and emerging and best practices related to community review boards or community oversight boards that other communities have in place around the country. And so we expect several pages of their report to be dedicated specifically to this topic, and would encourage the CPRB to wait and consider that feedback, as well as the community's Lawrence Listens feedback, prior to forwarding their ordinance to the City Commission. Task number 10 was to reconsider Chapter 13 of the City Code, which charges law enforcement with their role in the community. This is a fairly brief and very broad ordinance. The consultant is not going to go necessarily line by line and offer us a new ordinance to replace Chapter 13. But we certainly would expect the consultant's report, which will serve as a sort of master plan for the department, to quite possibly result in revisions to the authorizing ordinance for the chief of police and the police department. So we could see some work on Chapter 13 of the code definitely spinning out of the consultant's reports, or the consultant's report and recommendations contained in that report. Number 11 was to consider community safety broadly, including public health, economic equality, environmental design, and other primary prevention-focused safety considerations to invest and invest accordingly. We would point again to the consultant report, but even more so, the city's strategic plan, of which there is an action just tonight on the consent agenda, really speaks to this space. And so we would really encourage the commission to drive additional work on this, this goal, this task through the strategic plan, and especially that safe and secure outcome, and then several of our commitments, including equity and inclusion, and community engagement. I can tell you we have had members even of our public health department serving on the safe and secure outcome team as we have developed KPIs and strategies for that particular outcome. And so we are trying to take a broad and I think, as you will see in the upcoming presentation discussion about our strategies, an engaging and collaborative approach to really think about safe and secure as an outcome at a community level, much more than just the police and just the fire and EMS department, which are squarely under the city's purview, but instead to think about it much more collaboratively and in an interdisciplinary way. And then finally, task 12 is to establish an intervention team for community members experiencing homelessness. We do have an intervention team in the community in the form of the Burton Ash Homeless Outreach Team. They are the primary outreach provider for people experiencing homelessness in the community. It is a small team, and they are most certainly under-resourced and overtasked. I think that I can speak candidly about that, and I think that we would all acknowledge that based on the last year of our experiences in this area. I will say also that typically the police department, unless it is a call unless the police department is responding to a call for service or an emergency call where a crime is being reported or somebody has been the victim of a crime, the first touch with community members experiencing homelessness is not always and maybe not typically with our police department. Our Parks and Rec department, quite frankly, often serves as that first point of contact, and Department Director Derek Rogers and his staff, in particular, Mitch Young, Tyler Fike, and several others working in our field operations within the park spaces, they tend to really be a first point of contact on a weekly basis, if not daily basis. They're doing check-ins with people who are finding their home in our city parks. And so they work very collaboratively, very frequently with the Burton Ash Homeless Outreach Team and the Lawrence Community Shelter and other service providers in the community to try to provide support for community members experiencing homelessness. So I would just say that this work is ongoing. We also have a presentation planned next week, which is intended to provide sort of an orientation to the coordinated entry system and the continuum of care and the services that exist and the systems that exist to provide support for our individuals and families experiencing homelessness in the community, and try to get those folks into stable housing. So maybe we look forward to having more discussion in depth about that with some of the experts working in that field at the next City Commission meeting next week. So that ends my talking points. I will open it up to the City Commission for any comments or additional points that they would like to land.
This is Commissioner Arnott. I just wanted to kind of provide a brief update of what the CJCC has been doing in a little bit more detail, just so that you all have that. I know that they're doing a lot. There are a lot of kind of subcommittees within that group who are doing a lot of work. We have been, over the first few years that I was on the CJCC, really working on mental health screenings when folks are placed in jail, looking at severe and persistent mental illness as well as addiction and the co-occurrence of those items, reducing their lengths of stay, as well as recidivism, and that work has had a significant impact on their lengths of stay as well as recidivism. I don't know that the impact on the recidivism has been as extensive as the length of stay, but it has been really impressive work in coordination with now the name of the organization is splitting my mind, and I apologize for that to them because they really are amazing and doing amazing work across the country. And Douglas County is one of the stars of the work that they are doing. We're also doing the law enforcement contact study. That has been taking longer than we would have liked because of COVID. Fewer folks were on the road, and so they are still working to get a statistically sound number of contacts in order to do that. And they have been really impressed with the cooperation from all of our law enforcement agencies throughout the entire county. That includes Baldwin, Eudora, Lawrence, KU, as well as the Sheriff's Department. So we are waiting on that, and I think everyone is kind of tapping our heels, grateful that we don't have that data right, but also just really looking forward to the conclusion of that study so that we can have a conversation about that. We are also doing, I am the chair of the Race and Equity, or I'm sorry, the Race and Ethnic Disparities Work Group. And we are working with Dr. Craven as he collects data both from the county and city, as well as the police department and sheriff department, including like geomapping, really looking at the micro and macro issues that the community are facing to kind of look at where are the seeds of disparate treatment, particularly in regard to race within our criminal justice system. And then the mental health team that Brandon mentioned that Bob Tryansky has really been the leader on and really providing really good guidance on that around the implementation of 988 and our mental health response team. And I think that there are a lot of opportunities for the city to get involved in that. One of the things that we've been discussing through the CJCC is that it's not a decision-making body. The folks on this board are folks who are engaged in the criminal justice system. And there are some lawmakers within that group from the city commission, from the county commission, but that is not their purpose. And we have really put a lot of thought and effort into the purpose of the CJCC. But I do think that there's a lot of room for collaboration. I think that there's a lot of room for talking about how the city wants to financially participate in some of those endeavors and how we can cooperate to make them effective, not only for the county, but for Lawrence as well. So those are kind of the biggest projects. And I think it depends on who you ask, what they think are the biggest projects that they're working on. But I see those having the biggest impact in regard to the 12 items that Brandon talked to us about tonight.
Mayor Finkel, thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Commissioner Nanda, for those updates. One question I had, Brandon, when are to remind everyone, including myself, the timeline on Citygate and the report?
Yes, Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Thank you for the question, Mayor. We actually just received the mid-project executive briefing, and we would look forward at this point now to have the first draft report in our hands within about 45 to 60 days, depending on how much feedback we give them based on that meeting.
Yeah,
and I might add, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mayor, but I might add, so the goal or the plan is to present the draft report. When it's first presented, it's not going to be presented as the final draft. The idea then would be to receive additional public feedback and feedback from the city commissioners, and maybe even go back with some of our stakeholder groups and listening groups and do a check-in to close the feedback loop, and make sure that the input that was provided through the public engagement process truly is reflected in the report that they've submitted.
Mayor Finkel, so probably by at least maybe June sometime, we'll have a pretty, a report for people to respond to, including ourselves.
Correct.
Thank you for that. Other questions for Brandon, or even Commissioner Nanda at this point, before we open it up to public comment? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and open this to public comment. If any member of the public would like to comment on this, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, or let Sherry know if you're present at City Hall.
This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. Mayor, no one has indicated that they want to provide comment on this, and there is no one in the commission room.
Oh, you're muted.
Mayor Fingeldine, Sherry, we can't hear you.
Sorry, Mayor. This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. There is no public comment on this item.
Mayor Fingeldine, thank you. I would bring it back to the commission for comments, discussion. I think we're just receiving this item, but any feedback?
This is Commissioner Ananda. I feel like I've been talking a lot and I apologize for that. Or maybe I don't, for taking up my space, but also I like to hear from other folks as well. I felt obviously we all felt a real sense of urgency last June when we had this conversation. And I think that these are really important items, and I am proud of the work that we've done on this. And obviously none of this moves as quickly as we would like. I'm sorry, my whole family is coming home and my dogs are barking. I apologize. I think that we have made progress on these items, which is why that update was important to me, particularly the work of the CJCC, for which we can take no credit, but I think that it's really important work within our community, and it's important to acknowledge that we're not the only ones doing this work. So I'm thankful for the update that Brandon is providing and the work that we have done. I think that there's still space for dialogue around these items. And I think that there's space for waiting until we receive that report to continue that. I think that on the item regarding the CPRB and the HRC, I would like to, about the report for the recommendations and feedback from the CPRB about membership. I would like for them to incorporate the report as well as the public information that they gained. And I don't know, it may be helpful for the commission to give that direction to those groups so that we can ensure that they are taking that into consideration before they provide us with those recommendations. But I mean, aside from that, I'm very pleased with the progress that we've made. And while it's not as expeditious as I would like, I'm really grateful that we are moving in that direction.
Mayor Fingeldine, I would echo those comments, and certainly know the Police Review Board, the Human Relations Board, Citygate, the Police Department, many folks, so CJCC obviously are all working hard on these items, and I look forward to getting to the point where we can bring some of them to fruition. And I do think we'll make some good progress when we get there. And so as with many things, it like you said, it takes longer than you think when you start the project, but getting it right is the most important part. So thank you for the work, and I look forward to continuing to move forward on that. And as we said, we've gotten a lot of public feedback. Cityscape has, Police Review Board has, and there's a lot yet to be gained, knowledge to be gained from that. So I look forward to getting that, and agree that we want to at least have some synthesis of that coming to us as we continue to move forward. Other comments from commissioners? Any other direction? Seeing none, Brandon, thank you for that report. Trent, thank you for that report, and we look forward to hearing more going forward. Why don't we go ahead and take a 10-minute break before we move on to item number 3. 10-minute break, be back a little after, let's see, 8:08. Order, Mayor Finkel, aye. It looks like we're ready to come back. I will take roll call. Vice Mayor Shipley,
Here.
Commissioner Nanda,
Here.
Commissioner Lawson,
Here.
Commissioner Bully,
Here.
Mayor Finkel, aye, present. We are back after a break, and we're moving on to regular agenda item number 3, which is to receive a report on the study of the emergency medical services. And I'm not sure who's leading this off.
I'll start us out tonight, Mayor.
Chief,
Good evening,
thanks.
Mayor and Commission. I'm Sean Coffey, your Fire Chief. Tonight with me, I have Division Chief Tom Fagan and Division Chief Kevin Joles. We're here to talk about the presentation by the Public Policy and Management Center from Wichita State University. On June of 2020, Division Chief Fagan developed and issued an RFP for review of emergency medical services within Douglas County. 3 agencies responded. A team made up of city, county, and IFF officials reviewed the 3 proposals, and we selected the Public Policy and Management Center from Wichita State. Misty Bruckner is here tonight with us to present on this research project. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank the leadership team for the project as we went through. There's a lot of time involved in that. And I'd also specifically like to point out the Division Chief Tom Fagan for his time and effort working with Misty and Wichita State on this project. And with that, I'll hand it off to Misty.
Thank you, Chief Coffey. Thank you, Mayor and Commission, for having us here tonight. Before we get started with the presentation, I would just like to echo Chief Coffey's words. Greatly appreciate the leadership team that was comprised from both the city and the county, as well as other community stakeholders on the representation from the IFF. They provided a lot of feedback to make this work possible here tonight. Joining me is Tom Jenkins and Daryl Coles, who will be project associates on this, and they'll be sharing some of the report also. I'm going to go ahead and start the slideshow here. So we were selected as part to complete this review of the emergency medical services. And there are a couple of things I just want to share before we get started. First, there are the tangible results of this work, which is being able to share what a great service that you are providing to your community. And there are tangible results of that every day. But the intangible part of this partnership, I think, is also felt with the cooperative work that happens between the city and the county and makes this type of community even better and stronger because of leveraging those resources. So we just wanted to make that comment to thank you for your leadership before we go into the details of this work. So our work involved 3 main areas that we looked at. We looked at the governance structure, of what would move this work forward. We look at the financial relationship and obligations for both entities. And then finally, we looked at the service delivery model and options for that. You'll see as we make this presentation, as we include it in the report, items that we think that should be important for the agreement, and also just items for potential work in the future, whether those would be work plans or just opportunities to continue the success of this effort. Within the RFP, there were certain requirements that we were asked to do and are included in the report. The first part of that was making sure the recommendations meet the National Fire Protection Association standards. We look at Kansas statutory responsibilities to make sure we were following within those requirements. We did best practice.
This is Mayor Finkel, real quick. Your slides aren't advancing. It looks like that we're seeing.
Okay.
Looks like you're trying to advance your slides, but we're not seeing that on the screen.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know. So stop the share and start over again here. Is that better, sir? Okay, great. Thank you.
It is, yes.
So we looked at statutory standards, and we also did best practice research for governance and funding of EMS, both within the state and then across the nation to see models that are out there. We looked at innovative models just in service delivery. We looked at all relevant agreements, and we interviewed many stakeholders that are involved within this system of care, both directly in public safety and first responders, but also stakeholders that touch in areas of health and mental health and other stakeholders within your community. And then finally, we developed the recommendations for this report. So I'm going to start in on the governance area and go through what we think are recommendations for the agreement. And then Tom Jenkins and Daryl Coles will take on the finance and the service area. So within the agreement for recommendation and governance, we'd recommend that there be established regular governance meetings. That this is a document that can continuously have new information, and that conversation that needs to happen between all entities is important for planning purposes, to make sure that future issues are identified, to talk about how service is going, to any questions about financials or financial exchange, that information can be covered in that. And really important to keep that communication going throughout the year to make any updates as needed. We think that you already have a very strong model for integrated medical and behavioral health planning. Several organizations are already meeting, and heard that earlier tonight on that. We just would encourage that. It does impact emergency medical services, as you know, and to make sure future planning for Lawrence Douglas Fire Medical is included in that, and is important to leverage all resources to make a difference in outcomes. The opportunity is there for performance measurements, so that all parties involved with this agreement have set expectations. The department already tracks many of these, and just making sure that those are represented on what outcomes and standards are expected from both entities is important. As the changes may occur in staffing in the future, and just to make sure that there's representation from Douglas County as a part of that selection process is also a recommendation to include in the agreement. One specific area that we talked about and received a lot of information on was the corner scene investigation. So this is an area that we think should be phased out, and got to an agreement on that, that it is something that can be provided by others, and can continue to make resources available for the main purposes of your fire, medical, and response to emergency services. And the last item for the agreement is to set a time frame of 3 years as a recommendation to have this agreement reviewed. I think that's one of the challenges, is that it had been a while for this agreement to have been reviewed and updated, and making that done in a more timely fashion will help keep this information up to date and meet the needs of both organizations. Few other considerations that are not necessarily part of the agreement that we think were identified with the engagement process, and certainly part of the best practices, were to define other stakeholder responsibilities. And what we're talking about is this is a systems approach. As you know, you have other organizations and that are providing first response, and to make sure that that is clear who does what, and that is communicated to them and is acknowledged within the service parameters for the organizations. Technical rescue is something that we looked at. We think this agreement helps with that, but I think there's more work to be done in that in the future, as far as the department's role and responsibility in responding into the outside of the unincorporated areas in Douglas County, and to look at that in addition. One of the items that we think could be looked at also is to allow for independent non-emergency medical transfers. Again, this needs more exploration, if this would be a cost-effective for the organization to do. Again, this goes back to making sure that emergency medical services are available to respond to those emergencies. And if it's a non-emergency transfer, it can take those resources offline more, and just to make sure that those are the priorities to have them to be able to respond to those services. The next one is to establish first responder regular meeting schedule. Some of this is in progress already with fire chiefs, but again, the responders is a bigger unit. So to make sure that they are meeting regularly to talk a wide variety of topics that they should be considering for the overall systems approach. You have a considerable amount of work that goes into these intergovernmental service agreements, and we became aware that there are many others that you have, which you are to be congratulated on. Thinking of ways to amplify that work for the future, to make sure that you are leveraging that to the greatest extent possible is one of the recommendations we have. It takes some time to get to understand and the nuances of this work, and having some dedicated resources to help move all of these forward is something we think you should consider. And then finally, measurements are going to change, and the priorities and standards, and just making sure that you're keeping that at the forefront of this work, and to make sure that both Douglas County and the city of Lawrence are familiar and are supportive of what the expectations are for this. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Jenkins, and he's going to talk about the financial model for this.
Thank you very much, Misty. One of the things that I would certainly enjoy highlighting for the commission, mayor and the city manager and all the other important folks with the city of Lawrence, is that this is a system that I think in many ways is a gold standard. But one of the challenges that we had certainly was to understand the math associated with service delivery between the entities of Lawrence and Douglas County. The financial model that we developed really tried to segregate and isolate where the financial investment was being made, and how that played into emergency medical services. And most importantly, we wanted to make sure that the end result from this effort reflected what was really going on, that you have stakeholders, namely the two primary entities here that have a vested interest in making sure that this financial model is defendable. And so we'll walk you through that. We also incorporated an administrative fee, which is part of the city of Lawrence and how business is typically done. And so we'll walk you through this process, but understanding and creating this financial model took some time, but I think the end result is certainly something to be proud of. On the next slide, if you don't mind, Misty, the current financial model, to put it bluntly, is just a bit archaic. It was based from the original consolidation of the Douglas ambulance service into the Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical model. And there wasn't a lot of science associated with it. These percentages were derived from really just past practice, and were not something that reflected the current segregation of work and how things were done. In the next slide that you'll see, what we proposed was to really look at the allocation of resources. And the way that we tried to simplify, and we understand that as elected officials, this is important that you have some understanding of it, of course, that we wanted to make sure that EMS only, or services, expenses that were associated just with the provision of emergency medical services, that we could identify those expenses. That there are some expenses that are not emergency medical at all, that because Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical provides a whole host of services to the city of Lawrence and the area, there are some things that are clearly not medical in nature, and we wanted to identify those. That's what's reflected in red. And then there are some expenses, as identified in purple, that really are a blend, that there are just a lot of things that when you have these job arrangements and a deployment model, that share some responsibility, that we had to find some science with which to divide up those costs. And so those are reflected in purple, as I said, in those shared costs. Going forward, what our obligation was to look at the current budget for Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical and figure out where we could allocate the various expenses so that we knew how to classify them, and we could try to determine for the city and for the county what the true cost of EMS was. On the next slide, you'll see that you have the kind of where the rubber hits the road. That we have some expenses, that's the just over $1 million worth of EMS only expenses that are Douglas County expenses. We have some completely non-emergency medical expenses. That's the little over $500,000 expenses that are in red reflected for the city of Lawrence. And then you have some shared costs, and the shared costs are obviously by the aggregate number at the bottom, the vast majority of the things that go on with Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical, nearly $21 million. And it was these expenses that we arrived at a cost share that is more reflective of the way business is done with this deployment model. On the next slide, the way that $20 million, those shared costs, when you look at the 36% and the 64%, that cost factor, this is how they would be allocated. So of the vast majority of the budgetary cost, about $8.5 million, in looking at how deployment is done, is assigned to Douglas County, and nearly $14 million, of course, to the city of Lawrence. That also includes the EMS only expenses, the medical only expenses, and those expenses that were non-EMS that I mentioned earlier. On the next slide, we also tallied an administrative fee, and this is a fee that took some time to understand and we tried as we went along to understand the integration of it. But this is an important fee. This is the fee that goes for all those services that go to support the department. And so I know that Misty may want to make some comments here, but it is essentially 10% of the total expenses, which comes to about $2.2 million. And then the county share of that is just the same cost share that we arrived at, that 36%. And so that administrative fee is something that is incorporated into the financial model of the agreement. The process that we found for the financial model was cumbersome, that anytime you're dealing with multiple geopolitical entities and you're trying to share services, that's complicated enough. And one of our obligations in this is to look at opportunities to streamline how this is done. And so the financial model, simply put in 9 steps, is really for us to figure out what is medical, right? What elements of the Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical budget are medical only? What are fire only? What is not medical that needs to be subtracted from the budget? What are those shared resources? What are those shared budgetary items? Calculate the administrative fee. And then, of course, it's this continual reevaluation, an exchange of financial information. And there's other items here. There's capital purchases, items that might be shared capital. And as Misty mentioned earlier, and as I know my colleague Daryl will mention in a little bit, there's also the coroner scene investigation component as well. The current process, as you can see on the screen, and I will not take time to go through, was much more cumbersome. And so we wanted to find something that could be replicated, could be understood easily. And so the process that you see on the screen will be the process going forward to interact between the two entities, where Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical will collect revenue, of course, and the city of Lawrence will send quarterly statements to Douglas County, including the elements listed in the bullet points below the red box. Douglas County will reimburse the city for those EMS only expenses, the shared 36% expenses. Subtracted from that will be what is gained in ambulance revenue. And we'll use the fourth quarter audited actuals to reconcile differences that have been paid. There are some considerations that need to be on the radar and in the minds of those officials, those decision makers within the city. Those are shared capital planning. Just like in a blended model such as this, there are opportunities, I think, for the entities to continue to work together. The tracking tools to continue to be able to be transparent and understand where the money is going, and also for change and growth. That the emergency medical services component provided by the city into the county is not unlike many cities. It's complex, it's ever changing, it's at the forefront of a lot of conversations. And so the need to plan for change and growth is imperative. And there's always the need for future conversations regarding cost allocation. And as Misty mentioned earlier in some of her opening remarks, one of the most important kind of keystone elements of what happens in the future is just conversation and communication. That this is an agreement that, by my memory, is about 25 years old, and it just needs to be, there needs to be some touch points from time to time to make it more successful and to keep it nimble. With that, I'll turn the floor over to my colleague, Chief Darrell Coles.
Hello, Darrell Coles, Project Associate for WSU. I'm just going to quickly run through some of the stuff we heard from our different focus groups as we talk to the various people in the city. Most of this stuff is make the proposed agreement. It's just low-hanging fruit and just common themes that we heard throughout from many of the groups. So first, we would recommend that we clarify all the tasks that the various agencies that are working with the EMS system there, with all the first response groups, with the hospital, just to make sure everybody understands the role of EMS, the role of the hospital, just so there's no confusion on what's going on. The fire department and medical department is really good at this, but just continue to analyze any changes of the system, changes in demographics, changes of the makeup of all your response agencies. We did see quite a deficit, not from our medical, but a deficit in data collection within the entire system. Your fire medical program does a very, very good job of collecting and analyzing their data, but data system-wide is not available to them, and it is not available to the system. So it makes it sometimes difficult to take a really good deep dive into what's going on in the system when you don't have a complete data set. And no fault of them, it's just the way that everything's currently structured. Might seem kind of trivial, but I guess it's worth noting within our report that the medical supply process just kept coming up with the first response groups. So we wanted to talk about that. And then just as system-wide performance standards, your fire department does a very good job with their standard of coverage, so on and so forth. But when it comes to system performance standards, because there is not a system approach to data collection, it's difficult to adopt system performance standards because that data is just not there to report on. Some other things that we came across that we thought was worth noting was, as in any system, it may be worth talking about your dispatch system and communication system. There are NFPA standards in place for time to dispatch, so on and so forth. A lot of systems rely on EMD accreditation to guide them through that process. Your fire department, I think, is putting the citizens in a really good place when it comes to systems innovations. And I really believe on the EMS side that innovations over the short term, at least, are going to start to reap benefits when it comes to reimbursement and so on and so forth. So they have you in a really good place, and we believe that acting upon some of those innovations is going to really help in the future. We do believe that a professional billing audit of all your EMS billing practices is probably in order. Not that they're doing a bad job, it's just that is a profession that's hard to keep up with. And as with a lot of things, if you can do some audits every once in a while from the experts, they might be able to find some areas for improvement. And then just purchasing alternatives, if you can find those and leverage different purchasing alternatives for medical supplies. Last thing is to try to reduce the non-emergency service impact to the entire system. And that's on the radar of any fire department, EMS service, and even police departments at this point. There's a lot of non-emergency work being done by emergency services anymore, and just trying to leverage different programs, different opportunities to lessen that impact. So all of your units and people are available to take care of emergencies when they do arrive. I believe the last slide, Misty, is just a redo from the governance section, but it all applies to the service delivery. So we thought we'd bring up some of this stuff again. These are, again, things that are probably not going to be part of a new service agreement, but they just came up enough in different areas through our research and talking to stakeholders that we thought we'd bring this stuff up, because it's going to have it. There is an impact to the service delivery of every single bullet point here. It was a little bit out of scope, but very, very worth bringing up was a technical rescue aspect, because you do have a fire department that is performing a lot of technical rescue all over the county, just as they do hazmat. So that's something that needs to be talked about. We believe that the non-emergency medical transfer work being done by the fire department is creating a burden to the emergency work, and it's at least worth taking a bigger deep dive into that. We just didn't have time through this project to do that. That's probably a whole nother project. Making sure the first responders are all on the same page and meeting regularly. And something that did come up that we thought was worth noting, and I'll end with this, is having some sort of staff support for all of these different agreements that you have. I think we ran across, and Misty may be able to help me, but we did run across some different governments that have just I think it's an agreement officer, or I don't know the name for it, but they do have a staff person 100% devoted to the intergovernment agreement support, and that's just their work that they do to try to stem that gap between city county government. And that's all I have. Let's see, have any other questions?
That is the end of our formal PowerPoint presentation. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to work with all the folks and the leadership team and the staff, and would be glad to answer questions you might have.
Mayor Finkel, I thank you for that report and thank you for all the work you've done. I know it's a lot of work and you've made a lot of good progress. Questions from commissioners?
This is Commissioner Larson. Could you somebody walk through how you determine the 36-64 split?
Yes, I'll be happy to. Thank you, Commissioner. The 36-64 split is based on the deployment of personnel. So there were a lot of different opportunities that we could have exercised to determine that split, and there was a lot of conversation about it. But what we came to realize was a pretty defendable model was to look at the minimum staffing for the fire department every day, 24/365. Were allocated to full on
This is Mayor Finkel, Tom, or you're cutting out on us there. I don't know if you can try again or if someone else could jump in.
Mayor, this is Misty Bruckner. I'll jump in just a little bit here. We did look at different models for how we could look at that shared cost and came down to the personnel allocation for that shared part. Personnel costs drive a lot of the cost associated with this. And so that was one way to make that distinction for those that are deployed every day to be on ambulances, to be specific for medical services, and then specific for the non-medical or the fire part of that. So that was how that is divided between 36 and 64.
Commissioner Larson, thank you very much for that explanation. So if it's based on personnel, how did you divide up when a firefighter that's also a EMT, how are those costs divided up?
Sure. So, but most of them, this is Misty Bruckner again, so most of them are, and so that's why that's in that shared cost model and would be in the shared. So the vast majority of the folks are in that shared as far as personnel. There's only a few that are in either solely EMS or solely non-EMS, and go back to that chart if that would be helpful, but that's the vast majority are shared.
Commissioner, so if they're a firefighter and an EMT, those costs are shared. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Commissioner Larson, thank you.
Mayor Finkel, other questions before we open it up to public comment?
Commissioner Larson, I do have a few more questions. I got my notes here that I'm trying to look through at the same time looking where I made the notes for. So, so this is on page 16 of the report. So when this involves the breakdown, and it took me a little bit, but I finally figured out how you came up with the totals, which seemed, based on your model, seems obviously correct. But I did have a question. When firefighters go out on a medical call with an ambulance, how do we get? Does the city get reimbursed for some of those costs because it's a medical, or how does that work when you got two firefighters and the ambulances going on the same call?
Way we do that, Commissioner Larson, is that all the EMS billing for a medical call, that is all returned to the county in medical billing fees. And so that's roughly about 2.4 million annually. And so we bill for that service, realizing that fire apparatus may go along as well to respond. If there's not a medic unit close by, the fire apparatus will first respond with the firefighters and provide that ALS care as well.
Commissioner Larson, thank you. So even though it's a medical call, we still pay for the firefighter. The city still pays for the firefighter, and it's not considered part of the medical call. That's
correct. We're going back to the 36%. That 36% was based upon, we have 7 medic units here in the county for EMS, and that roughly equates to 14 individuals. And we took that was 36% of the daily minimum staffing, based upon fire apparatus have 4 on it, with the exception of our rescue that has 3. And when you do that percentage, it comes out to 36% based upon our standard of cover. Realizing that the EMS providers on the ambulance are firefighters as well. So if a fire comes in, say at fire station number 5, an apartment complex across the street, and the fire truck is gone, the medic unit responds across the street, puts on their protective clothing and SCBAs, and initiates fire attack activities. Conversely, the medic unit's gone, a code blue, which is somebody having a heart attack, comes in across the street. The fire apparatus goes across the streets and initiates ALS care as well. So our people are fully integrated and perform both functions.
Okay, thank you. This is Commissioner Larson. Thank you again. So I have a couple questions on page 12 of the report. There's item number 7 talks about capital expenses such as buildings and so forth, and that those have not been clarified. So how is that going to be done, or when is it going to be done? Is it going to be part of the agreement, or is this a later discussion? It's item number 7 on page 12.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is Misty Bruckner. The ones that are easy, right, that are the 100% EMS, I think that those have been clarified. It's the shared ones. I think the past capital planning, all entities involved has said there's been a lot of improvement in the last few years to do that. And what our recommendation is by having those regular meetings and talking about planning ahead, that there will be more opportunities to divide this work on the shared capital. I think it's down to nuances by projects. And so having our recommendation is some of that criteria will be defined ahead of time. And then as projects come in, that'll be easier to divide what is only EMS, what is fire, and what is shared cost. But we did not get into the details yet in this report.
Mr. Larson, thank you. So make sure I understand. So that clarification will not be part of the agreement. Is that correct?
I think the recommendation is that it should follow that shared cost model. What all might be included in that shared cost, it still needs to be defined because of the nuances of the projects that might be coming forward.
Okay. Commissioner Larson, thank you. I asked that because we have struggled dividing up the costs of buildings and repairs and maintenance on some items, not that I call a lot, but it has kind of been a little spot that we struggled with. So I think it's important that we make sure the clarification is very strong on that. So I appreciate that. So thank you. On page 25 of the report, this is about the non-emergency transfer alternatives. And one was option 2, which is the non-emergency transfers, use of off-duty. The option was to use off-duty firefighters hired back in overtime for this cost. So if the county chose this, would the city be reimbursed for those firefighters' times?
Chief Jenkins, you did the work on this. Do you want to jump in and talk about that? Are you able to connect?
I certainly hope so, unless the question is extra difficult, and then I'm going to fake a Wi-Fi problem. So hopefully I'm good now. So it's not really the county's decision. It really is incorporated into Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical. It's as much the city's decision as to how those non-emergency transfers could take place. The problem with the transfers is it distracts from the emergency service delivery. It's a wonderful service to the hospital that the department provides. Those options essentially are trying to get some creative juices flowing as to what needs to take place. But fundamentally, your 7 on-duty paramedic ambulances don't need to be doing non-emergency transfers. That's a distraction from the emergency service delivery. And so some alternative needs to take place. If there is some money, there's some money and some revenue associated with those transfers. So there's the potential for that to balance out, but it is not a reimbursable, it's not a county to city reimbursable expense. That's not, that was not identified as how that would work.
Commissioner Larson, thank you very much. My question, appreciate that information. My question, however, was that option 2 is proposing the use of off-duty firefighters to be hired back to do the non-emergency transfers. If this were to be chosen, and we've used firefighters to do the non-emergency transfers, would the city be paying those firefighters, or would that be a county responsibility?
That would be a city responsibility. That would be Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical.
Okay. Commissioner Larson, thank you.
This is Commissioner Boley. Would the city under that option receive the revenue for the non-emergency transfers?
I think that if as the non-emergency transfer conversation continues to take place, I think that would be something that you would want to discuss, and it would be my recommendation that you would.
Okay. Commissioner Larson, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner Bowling.
Well, this Commissioner Bowling, is the city currently receiving any of that revenue?
No, we do not receive any of that revenue. The county uses that to offset their total cost for provision of EMS within all of Douglas County.
Mayor Finkel, I just real quick remind people to introduce themselves every time they speak.
Commissioner Larson, just a couple more questions. On page 23, there's a discussion on an audit, and I'm trying to find it here. Essentially, that I believe it was on page 20. I've got that as 23. They're recommending an audit be done. And I apologize, I'm not seeing where I outlined that. But anyway, there was a recommendation for an audit to be done. And my question was, is that being done now? Audits, regular audits?
It's not a third-party audit. There is not regularly done.
Okay. Commissioner Larson again. So with the agreement's going to have in it that these will be done, is that correct?
This is Daryl Coles. I don't believe in our proposed agreement that there's anything in there about a billing services audit. It was just a captured best practice that we wanted to put into the final report, but not something that we're recommending that it's placed inside of the agreement, just because I think that I would hate to recommend to put something in an agreement and then you have an auditor come in, audit your billing practices, and lo and behold, you have the best billing system in the Midwest, and then you're hamstrung to continue an audit when it was found you really didn't need it. We thought we'd put that in there because we believe from talking to many different EMS services in Kansas and nationwide that these third-party EMS billing audits have provided very good information and been fruitful to different EMS services that have taken an opportunity to do them.
Commissioner Larson, thank you. So you're not recommending an audit. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, not recommending that it's placed into the service agreement. But that it would be a best practice that we would recommend happens, but not just place any kind of verbiage into the service agreement to do so.
Commissioner Larson, thank you very much. My last question, I promise, is on page 80. And what I noticed on that table, this is collection and revenue billing information, is that the collection rates are all about 50 to 60 percent collection rate. Is that low? Is that low does that mean that 45% is not collected and it's just written off?
There's Sean Coffey, Fire Chief, and I'll let the Division Chief Joel's comment a little bit more. One of the things that we have to factor in is Medicare to Medicaid. When we take a transport, say a person from here to KU Med Center, and we may bill $1,000 for that medical call, the medical transfer, Medicare or Medicaid may only pay $500. And so we end up writing off that other $500.
Okay.
And so that's where that comes from. Chief Joel, do you have anything additional on that?
Kevin Joel, Division Chief of VMS. Just a quick example of some of the fees that we may charge. So on a basic life support, run-of-the-mill call, we'll just say abdominal pain to LMH hospital that would maybe be about 5 miles away from a call. And these are just all arbitrary numbers, but we charge $595, which is a pretty fair rate for that transport, plus mileage, which is about $9.50 per mile or so. What we would get paid from Medicaid would be about $40. And what we would get paid on Medicare would be about $220. So the portions in which we collect are far less when we're talking about Medicare, Medicaid versus a private pay or a third party insurance company. So I think that we may be a little bit off. I think we're closer to 70% net overall within the collections on billing. This is a far more cumbersome discussion than we could have tonight. We would be talking until tomorrow, and I would need my billing specialist in order to have these conversations because she's the professional with this. There are a lot of conversations that need to be had in regards to the billing side of things. But when we talk about from the hospital to lower level of care and the money that we get versus collected to higher level of care is always going to pay more. It usually comes down to medical necessity on whether we're transferring somebody from a hospital to a lower level of care or back to home. So there are opportunities, just depends on which way we decide to go in that regard.
Commission, this is Misty Bruckner. I would just add in, I think that's why we think a third party coming in might be able to help identify some opportunities, but echoing, this is complex and we're not to the point of being able to benchmark that, but an audit would help the department be able to do that.
Commissioner Larson, thank you for those explanations.
This is Commissioner Boley. Could I ask you to please expand on the data collection aspects you talked about? I believe it's Mr. Coles. Can you talk about what data is not available?
Yes, Daryl Coles. So we quickly found out, and this is not unique to your system. It's actually very, very, at least in the state of Kansas, and I can't speak outside of the state of Kansas on this one, but within the state of Kansas, there is a data gap. And that gap generally occurs with a first response agency, first arrival on scene to when the ambulance gets there. And while you could extrapolate some data from your guys' CAD system, because it's not being cleaned up and put into a patient care report, or at least a fire station report of some sorts, it's exactly that. It's just raw data out of CAD. So there's a lot of opportunities if you are gathering that data. So we'll just take a heart attack victim. Right now, your system, the only way your system is able to document first medical contact and care beginning is when your ambulance gets there, out in the county anyways. So that's just not true data, because we know you have very good first responders that are arriving on scene before the ambulances sometime and beginning care, but that data is not being captured because there's not a common thread of data being inputted. I think as good as your fire medical department is with data, if your system can start inputting some wide data, I think they could put together a really holistic picture of how the community is being cared for, and do some good work with that. But it's just not there. I just from doing this project, I think your community is poised for a huge advancement in their area with your consolidated fire districts and the new leadership, with your consolidated fire chief and so on. I think there's a huge opportunity for your system to fix that and probably become somewhat of a leader for the state on how that can be done right.
Commissioner Boley, thank you.
Mayor, Sean Coffey, Fire Chief. If you have a moment, I'd like Division Chief Fagan to also comment on that. He's kind of our data guru, and he can talk about some of the complexities. As Daryl mentioned, that relationship between the first responders in the county versus our data.
Good evening, Commissioners. This is Tom Fagan, Division Chief of Administration with LDCFM. Chief Coles was referring to the segment of data for the other agencies that we respond with. After the consolidation of the consolidated fire districts, there are 5 other first responding agencies that fire medical co-responds with. And so when we look at our response times, our response data, and some of our outcomes, the primary records management system that we use is for Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical. Those 5 other first responding agencies all have their own records management systems in which they capture their data. And so right now, when we report our response performance, even in the rural areas and in the unincorporated areas of Douglas County, it's representative of our performance as an organization and doesn't include the good performance that may exist in those first responding jurisdictions. And so that's what Chief Coles is referring to, is that segment of performance isn't always reflected. Sometimes we may beat first responders in some of those areas, but other times they may beat us. So I hope that may clarify the segment of data that he's referring to.
Mayor Finkel, other questions before we open this to public comment? We'll go ahead and open it to public comment then. And if any member of the public would like to speak, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature. Or if you're present, let Sherry know.
Seamus Albritton.
Hello, my name is Seamus Albritton. I'm currently the president of IAFF, Local 1596, labor organization that represents the firefighters, EMTs, and paramedics in town. I'll start by thanking the team from Wichita, as well as city and department management, for including us in this project. Confident that we'll continue to be involved as some of these future work items are worked on throughout the year and in the future. I do want to use tonight as an opportunity to speak on one specific future work item and the recommendations around it. In the final document, it discusses, as our presenters discuss, the difficulties that our non-emergency medical transfers are causing for our response model. And then it offers 3 suggested solutions. As our EMS professionals in town, we would like to advocate that we continue to do it, continue to handle these calls as LDCFM, and use the recommendation to staff it with LDCFM members. We also would passionately passionately warned against the idea of bringing in a third-party ambulance system, otherwise known as a private or for-profit ambulance system to handle these situations. So currently, when our community members call for an ambulance, regardless of the reason, they are using a government service and are getting world-class care in which we have control over. If we were to invite a private or a for-profit company to come in and handle these, our community members would be subject to all the problems that are associated with the for-profit medical care system. These companies are notorious for overcharging their patients, providing subpar care, and paying their employees little to nothing. However, if we follow the recommendation to put in place another medic unit, another ambulance staffed with our people to handle these things, handle these calls, our community members are still going to be treated in a system in which they are viewed as the people they are and not potential revenue. Additionally, and I think this should be noted, if we continue to use LDCFM, a city department, to manage these calls, these situations, the people who are doing the work will still continue to be under direct control of our elected officials and city management. This means we have better opportunities to control the care, the quality care that our community members are receiving, as well as a direct way to hold those people doing the work accountable to our community values, our department values. LDCFM's vision statement even mentions this in the last line of the vision statement. It talks about being committed to holding ourselves, holding each other accountable to our community's values and our organization's values. Let's maintain that. We would advocate to be able to maintain that in every aspect of EMS that we provide for our citizens. Thank you.
Chris Flowers.
Hi, I wasn't, this is Chris Flowers. I wasn't going to speak, but that last speaker made really good points. Like I've heard about private for-profits, you know, doing ambulance stuff and emergency stuff. And I'd much prefer our local, what we have now doing it. I think we have a pretty good fire department, and I think he made a really good point about what the quality of service we might get from a for-profit private one. So I fully support the last commenter. Thank you.
This is Sherry Reederman, City Clerk. Is there anyone else who would like to provide comment on this item? And Mayor, there's no more comment.
Mayor Finkel, aye. Thank you, Sherry. We'll bring it back to the commission for the questions or discussion or comments. Guess I would, oh, go ahead, Commissioner Bullock.
Commissioner Boley, I would like to express my gratitude for all the work that's gone into this. It's a very impressive product, and I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved in the discussions. I think this provides us with a new platform in which to serve the community together with our partners at the county.
This is Commissioner Larson, and I would just, the document itself is, I think it's pretty amazing what has come forth to us. I know they've been working on this for many, many months, and it's taken a lot of meetings as well as back and forth, and appreciate the county, Sarah and Craig, both in the city, for helping negotiate this contract. One of the, I guess the biggest concerns I have on this is still how the firefighters will be charged if they're working on a medical situation. And I'm sure that will come to light and will be part of the contract in detail. So I'm looking forward to actually seeing a detailed contract, so that way we can have a better chance of understanding what all the recommendations are from this report. But yeah, again, I just want to thank everybody for working on this. This is an amazing process that has happened here. Thank you.
Mayor Finkel, I'll echo those comments. And I guess when we started this project, I was expecting, some mathematical calculations to come out of the deal, but to see what we got from this about different improvements we can make to the entire system, not just how we pay for it. I was happy to see that, and clearly Chief Coffey and the captains are taking some of these things to heart and figuring out ways to improve our system. And obviously with some of these future work items, we're going to continue to see, I think, good discussions come out of it. And certainly I know one of those, as Seamus talked about, will be the transport conversation, and that's, for another day. But in my legal practice, I've had some run-ins with private ambulance services either, and they're not on the top of my favorite entities to work with. But so I tend to lean that way, but I know that's a conversation for another day. I also like this, some of these ideas we've talked a lot about before, which is, improvements to dispatch, or something that we need to talk about in responding. And then this data gap, I think, is important, as well as the intergovernmental work. And so I appreciate those recommendations, and very much appreciate Wichita State and all the folks who worked on this. It's a very impressive product, and look forward to seeing the final agreement and moving forward.
This is Misty Breckner. We just want to thank all of the great leadership and the folks within the departments that helped us do this, and appreciate the opportunity to work with your community to share this information. So thank you very much.
Mayor Finkel, as I look at the agenda item, it provide recommendations and then request a final draft to be completed. I don't know, Sherry, is that a motion you want from us, or is just tell them to keep working?
This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. I don't feel that we need a motion on this, but perhaps Chief Fagan or Coffey could comment on that if they feel like they need it.
I don't feel we need a motion on that. We were just seeking direction from you so we can, we have a presentation tomorrow night with the County Commission on this agreement and with Wichita State. We'll be going over it with them. We working on a draft agreement that we'll be coming forward with, working with city legal based upon the recommendations provided within the report.
Mayor Finkel, I think that makes sense, and I think general consensus is we're headed in the right way, and we look forward to seeing the final report. And Commissioner Lawson might have some more questions then, but but no, that'll be good, and we look forward to that. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item 4. This is a resolution regarding industrial revenue bonds related to U.S. engineering. That item has been deferred. However, I need to open the public hearing and allow anyone from the public who would like to speak on this item to speak. And then the action the commission will take will be to defer it to April 20th. But I'll go ahead and open this item to public comment. If anyone would like to make a public comment.
Commissioner Bully, do you need a motion to open the public hearing?
We've decided we don't need a motion to open it. We can just open it. And so thank you for that. But we'll just go ahead and open the public hearing. And if any member of the public would like to speak on it, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, and we'll let Sherry know.
This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. There's no public comment on this item.
Mayor Finkel, aye. And Diane, you turned on your camera, but I want to make sure, do we need to do anything else besides continue this, take a motion to continue this till April 20th?
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Mayor, you're correct, to continue the hearing to the 20th. Thank you.
Look for a motion to
This
continue.
Commissioner Boley, I move that we continue the hearing until April 25th. Is that it?
April 20th.
April 20th.
Commissioner Larson, second.
Mayor Finkel, we have a motion by Commissioner Boley, a second by Commissioner Lawson. Commissioner Boley?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Shipley?
Aye.
Commissioner Ananda?
Aye.
Mayor Finkeldine, aye. Passes 5-0, and we'll continue that item till April 20th. That brings us to commission items. Do any commissioner have any items they'd like to bring forward? Mayor Finkeldine, one item I'd just like to maybe consider putting on a future work session or presentation is, I know that Steve Novak and Mary Doveton and Margaret from the Arts Center, those arts organizations have been working on a kind of an economic impact statement that they've started to present to a few groups. And they've asked for an opportunity in the future. They're going to want to present it to the county commission as well as us. And I said I'd bring that up to see if we were interested in hearing a little bit more about the economic impact of some of their organizations going forward and how that relates to our economic strategic plan.
Vice Mayor Shipley, I support that.
Looks like we have some support for that. So I'll have them work with staff and maybe figure out a time that works out for them. Any other commission items? Seeing none, we'll move to the city manager's report. Craig?
Thank you. My report has got several items on it. City Manager Craig Owens. The first item is we did provide an update in there about this substantial work that's been going on to prepare for the new transit center. And I don't know if anybody has any questions. Transit and Parking Manager Adam Weigel is here available to answer any questions on that one. Adam, you want to say anything?
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Yeah, I won't reiterate what's in the update, but we're just excited. This has been a project that's been discussed and studied for a very long time. So I think staff and partners at KU and bus operators are all very excited to get going on it and looking forward to stakeholder meetings and public engagement to come later this month. And that should give our consultant good information to start building some conceptual ideas. So we're preparing to get going, but I can answer any questions you might have.
Mayor Finkel, I don't have any questions, but I did review that, and it does look like a good process, and I look forward to that. Appreciate the work you're doing in that. Certainly, as we talk about our commitment to public engagement, you've checked that one off the list here. I look forward to seeing what we get back and seeing the outcomes on that. Other comments on that? Or if not, Craig?
Thank you, City Manager Craig Owens. The next item on here is, while it's the 28th consecutive year that we've received the Award of Financial Reporting Achievement from the Government Finance Officers Association, it's one that I always like to highlight, even though we've done it 28 years in a row. Not every city does, and I think it speaks to the importance of transparency and quality of financial reporting that we do consistently and have over the course of the years. It's a standard that we have continued to be proud that we deliver, and it's recognized by a third-party independent agency in that. And so I draw your attention to that, and also express my appreciation, gratitude to our finance department and Jeremy Wilmoth, who's our director. Happy to answer any questions about that. The other items are a little more standard. We saw our building permits report and the sales tax reports, quite a bit of data and information in there. And then the other two are the upcoming agenda items and future agenda work sessions. Other than that, happy to answer any questions.
Mayor Finkelstein, any questions for Craig? Seeing none, this is a public hearing item. If anyone has any public comment on these 6 items in the city manager's report, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature and Sherry will call upon you.
Sherry Reederman, City Clerk. There's no public comment on this item.
Mayor Fingeldine, thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Craig, for that manager's report. We'll go on to the calendar items. Any updates on the calendar? Seeing none, our last item before adjournment is we're going to look to adjourn to executive session for 10 minutes. And I'd look for a motion on that.
Mayor, before we do that, I just wanted to get clarification.
I'm not sure if Tony's already gone into the executive session, but the motion that's included references our temporary resolution 7355 that was just replaced on our consent agenda with 7360, which is effective as soon as you adopt it. So I just want to make sure we're referencing, is that clear? So I want to make sure we're referencing the appropriate resolution. So when you read that, I would suggest we need to change that to 7360.
Mayor Fingeldine, I'm looking at Commissioner Bully. If he's going to make this.
Mr. Bowley, I'll give a stab at it. I move that we approve a motion to recess into executive session for approximately 10 minutes to discuss privileged legal communications from the city's attorneys regarding pending litigation pursuant to KSA 75-4319B2. The justification for the executive session is to keep attorney-client privilege matters confidential at this time. The City Commission meeting will resume in its virtual format in accordance with resolution number 7360 at the conclusion of the executive session.
Commissioner Nanda, second.
Mayor Fingeldine, a motion by Commissioner Bully, a second by Commissioner Nanda. Commissioner Bully?
Aye.
Commissioner Nanda?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Shipley?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson?
Aye.
Mayor Fingeldine, aye. Passes 5-0. We'll return at 9:30.
See Craig's
And we have nothing to report. I'll go ahead and take roll call, I guess, first. Vice Mayor Shipley,
Here.
Commissioner Lawson,
Here.
Commissioner Nanda,
Here.
Commissioner Bully,
Here.
Mayor Finkeldine here. And now I guess I'll say it again. We're back from executive session. We have nothing to report. I look for a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Larson moved to adjourn.
Commissioner Ananda, second.
Mayor Finkeldine, motion by Commissioner Lawson, a second by Commissioner Ananda. Commissioner Lawson,
Aye.
Commissioner Ananda,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Shipley,
Aye.
Commissioner Bully,
Aye.
Mayor Finkeldine, aye, passes 5-0. Thank you all. See you next week.